Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're building in our Minecraft world while I tell you about someone who discovered that the two people he trusted most had a routine he never could have imagined. This story is one of those reminders that sometimes the ugliest truths hide in the places you feel safest. Before we jump in, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been tuning in, leaving comments, and showing love to the channel. You're all incredible, and your support truly means the world to me. So our story starts with a guy who thought his wife and best friend were looking out for him, until one night he pretended to pass out and realized something was very, very wrong. I thought my wife Sarah and best friend Mike were helping me with my drinking problem. That's what they told me anyway. Every time I'd have too many beers and pass out on the couch, they'd be there. They'd get me to bed, make sure I was comfortable, lock up the house. Sarah would tell me the next morning how grateful she was that Mike stayed to help, how she couldn't have gotten me upstairs without him. I'd wake up feeling guilty and hungover, and they'd both be so understanding about it, so supportive. I'd been struggling with alcohol for about a year. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that I was drinking most nights and occasionally overdoing it on weekends. Sarah had been patient about it. Mike, my best friend since college, had been encouraging me to cut back. They were my support system, or so I thought. The truth started to surface on a random Thursday night. I'd planned to drink like usual, had my beers lined up, ready for another night of numbing out. But something felt off that day. I can't explain it. Just this nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. So instead of actually drinking the beers, I poured them out in the bathroom sink and filled the bottles with water. Then I pretended to drink them, pretended to get progressively drunker, slurred my words, stumbled a bit, did my usual routine of passing out on the couch around 10. I heard Sarah call Mike about 20 minutes later, told him I was out again, asked if he could come help get me to bed. He lived 15 minutes away. I stayed perfectly still on that couch, controlling my breathing, keeping my eyes closed. Mike arrived. I heard them talking in hushed voices, Sarah saying she was worried about me, Mike saying I needed to get help, both of them sounding so concerned and caring. Then they got me upstairs. Well, pretended to struggle with my dead weight while I actually helped by keeping my legs under me. They tucked me into bed. Sarah kissed my forehead, told me she loved me. I heard them leave the bedroom and close the door. I waited in that bed, completely sober, listening. Heard them go back downstairs, heard the TV turn on, figured they were just hanging out, maybe having a glass of wine and decompressing. That would have been fine. That would have been normal. But that's not what happened. Exactly 20 minutes after they put me to bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs. 2 sets, going to the guest room at the end of the hall. The door closed, and then I heard sounds that made my blood run cold. My wife, my best friend, in my house, while I was supposedly passed out drunk in the next room. I lay there frozen for what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes. Heard them finish, heard them go back downstairs, heard Mike leave around midnight, heard Sarah come back to our bedroom and slip into bed next to me. She kissed my shoulder and whispered that she loved me. I didn't sleep at all that night, just stared at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened, trying to figure out how long this had been going on, trying to understand how the two people I trusted most in the world could do this to me. The next morning, Sarah acted completely normal, asked how I was feeling, made me breakfast, said Mike had helped get me to bed and stayed for a bit to make sure I was okay. I played along, acted hungover and grateful. The whole time my mind was racing. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. So I went online and ordered hidden cameras, small ones that looked like phone chargers and alarm clocks. Got them installed within 3 days. Positioned them to cover the guest room, the hallway, the living room. I wasn't going to confront anyone based on one night. I needed to know the full scope of this. Then I kept up my routine, kept fake drinking, kept passing out, and they kept up their routine too. Like clockwork, every single time I was supposedly too drunk to function, Mike would come over. They'd put me to bed, wait 20 minutes, guest room. I documented it all. 3 weeks, 7 instances. Every single one recorded in high definition. As I watched the footage during the day while Sarah was at work, I started noticing details I'd missed. The way they touched each other, the familiarity of it. This wasn't new. This was practiced, comfortable. I checked our phone records, started going back through months of texts and calls, found patterns. Mike coming over on nights I'd been drinking heavily, Going back 8 months. 8 months of this. The betrayal was suffocating. These weren't strangers. This wasn't some random affair. This was my wife and my best friend, systematically using my drinking problem as cover for their relationship. They'd probably been hoping I'd drink myself into oblivion so they could keep this going indefinitely. Here's where it gets absurd. Mike's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks. His wife always threw him a party. This year, Sarah had suggested we co-host it at our place since we had the bigger backyard. Everyone had already RSVP'd, both families. Mike's wife, his kids, his parents, Sarah's parents, our mutual friends, about 40 people total. I told Sarah I thought co-hosting was a great idea, started planning this big celebration, rented tables and chairs, ordered catering, set up a projector and screen in the backyard for a slideshow. Everyone thought it was going to be a photo montage of Mike's life. I let them think that. The party started at 6. Everyone showed up. Mike arrived with his wife Jessica and their 2 kids. Sarah's parents came, Mike's parents. Everyone was drinking and laughing and having a great time. I stayed sober, played the perfect host. Around 7:30, I announced it was time for the birthday slideshow. Got everyone gathered in the backyard. Mike was front and center with Jessica. Sarah was standing next to me. I clicked play on the laptop. The screen lit up, but instead of childhood photos and embarrassing yearbook pictures, it was security footage. Date stamped, time stamped. Crystal clear video of my wife and my best friend walking into my guest room together, of them coming out 45 minutes later, of this happening over and over again. The silence was deafening. You could hear the audio from the videos, Sarah saying my name, making sure I was really passed out, Mike laughing about something, then sounds that made it very clear what they were doing in that room. Sarah grabbed my arm, trying to stop the video. I pulled away. Mike was standing there, face completely white, frozen. Jessica was staring at the screen like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Sarah's mother started crying. Mike's father looked like he was about to have a heart attack. The video kept playing, clip after clip. Different nights, same pattern. Irrefutable evidence of an 8-month affair conducted in my home while I was unconscious in the next room. You know, if you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Real talk, these stories keep me up at night, and I know they do the same for you. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Are you team expose them publicly or team ghost and move on? Let me know, because trust me, the families had opinions too. Sarah's mother actually slapped her across the face, right there in front of everyone. Mike's wife Jessica grabbed the USB drive from my hand and asked if this was everything. I told her yes. She looked at Mike and said she wanted him out of the house tonight. Their kids were crying. Sarah was trying to explain, trying to say it wasn't what it looked like. I just stared at her and asked what else it could possibly look like. Mike tried to talk to me, tried to say something about how it just happened, how they never meant to hurt me. I told him to get out of my house, told him if he ever contacted me again, I'd file a restraining order. His parents left with him. Most of the guests cleared out within minutes. It was the most uncomfortable 40 people had ever felt at a birthday party. Sarah's parents stayed. Her father asked me what I wanted to do. I said I wanted a divorce. Sarah started begging. Said she'd end it with Mike. Said she'd do anything. I asked her how many times. She didn't answer. I asked again. She finally admitted it had been going on since last March. 8 months. Dozens of times. Every time I drank too much and passed out, she had an excuse to call Mike over. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Sarah tried to fight it at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer advised her to settle. She got to keep some stuff from the house. I kept the house itself. Mike and Jessica's divorce went through even faster. Turns out this wasn't his first affair, just the first one she'd had proof of. I've been sober for 7 months now, completely sober. Haven't touched alcohol since that Thursday night when I first caught them. Turns out I didn't actually have a drinking problem. I had a wife and best friend problem. Once they were gone, I had no desire to drink. It was like the stress and betrayal had been driving it all along. I'm single now, dating occasionally but taking it slow. I have new friends, people I met through a hiking group and a book club, people who don't have years of history with me, which is actually refreshing, people who don't know about Sarah or Mike or any of it unless I choose to tell them. Sarah tried to reach out a few months ago. sent me a long email about how sorry she was, how she'd been in therapy, how she understood if I never forgave her. I didn't respond. There's nothing she could say that would change what happened. Mike sent a similar message, deleted it without reading past the first line. The thing that still gets me sometimes is how long they must have been planning it. How they must have talked about it, coordinated it, used my struggles as their cover story. They took something I was vulnerable about and weaponized it. That's not just betrayal, that's calculated cruelty. But I'm better now, healthier, clearer headed, surrounded by people who actually give a damn about me. And every day I wake up sober and free is a reminder that I made the right choice. Some people deserve public exposure. Some betrayals are so complete that quiet dignity isn't enough. They used my trust against me for months. The least I could do was return the favor with the truth. But speaking of people who weren't where they claimed to be, this next story involves a babysitter, security footage, and a husband whose timeline didn't quite add up. So I need to start this one by saying I never thought I'd be that wife. You know, the one who checks up on her husband, who second guesses every text, who wonders if he's really where he says he is. That wasn't me. That wasn't us. We had 2 kids, a decent house, a normal life. Jake worked long hours, sure, but he always made time for the kids, or at least that's what I thought. It started with something so small I almost didn't catch it. Our babysitter Emma was packing up her things one evening when I got home early from a work event. She was chatting with me about her college classes, complaining about her morning schedule, and then she said it, just this offhand comment while zipping up her backpack. She said Jake must work really late because she never sees him before 9 at night. She said it like it was obvious, like it was just a fact we all knew. I laughed it off in the moment, told her, yeah, his job keeps him busy. But the second she left, that comment just sat there in my brain like a stone, because Jake told me he always relieved Emma by 6:30. Every single night. He'd text me around 6:45 with updates, bedtime routines, what the kids ate for dinner. Sometimes he'd send me photos of them playing or watching TV. I had no reason to doubt him, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Emma had been our babysitter for almost a year. She wasn't the type to lie or exaggerate. She was a sweet college kid who needed the extra cash and genuinely loved our kids. So why would she say she never saw him before 9? That night I went into our home security app. We had a nanny cam in the living room, nothing creepy, just something we'd installed when the kids were babies so we could check in during the day. I scrolled back through the footage, started with that same day. Emma left at 9:04, Jake walked in at 9:06. The kids were already in their pajamas, already settled. I went back further. The day before, same thing. Emma there until 9, Jake arriving right after. I checked the entire week, then 2 weeks, then a month. Every single day, the same pattern. Emma stayed until 9 or just past it. Jake showed up minutes later, but every single night, like clockwork, I had texts from him at 6:45 saying he was home with the kids. I sat there on the couch staring at my phone with this weird, numb feeling spreading through my chest. It didn't make sense. Why would he lie about something like that? What was he doing for 2.5 hours every night? Then came the breaking point. I started looking closer at the texts. The photos he sent. Most of them were generic. The kids on the couch, the kids eating chicken nuggets, nothing time-stamped, nothing that proved when they were taken. I opened our shared photo album and cross-referenced the images. Turns out a lot of those photos were old, reused, sent to me on different nights like they were happening in real time. That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional, calculated. He'd been lying to me every single night for months and covering his tracks like some kind of low-budget spy. I didn't confront him. I wanted to. I wanted to scream and throw his phone across the room and demand to know what the hell he thought he was doing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I just knew that if I tipped him off too early, he'd come up with some excuse I'd half believe. So instead, I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic, like something out of a movie, but I needed proof, real proof, not just nanny cam footage and reused photos. I needed to know where he was going and why. The investigator was a woman in her 50s named Diane, who worked out of a small office near the courthouse. She didn't ask a lot of questions, just took down Jake's information, his work schedule, his car details. She said she'd follow him for a week and report back. That week was the longest of my life. I went through the motions, made breakfast, dropped the kids at school, smiled at Jake when he kissed me goodbye in the morning, texted him back when he sent his fake updates at 6:45. The whole time I felt like I was living in this alternate reality where everything looked normal, but nothing actually was. Diane called me on a Thursday. She had something. She wanted to meet in person. We sat in her car outside a coffee shop and she handed me a folder. Inside were photos. Jake's car parked outside a condo building downtown. Jake walking into the building with a woman I didn't recognize. The two of them sitting on a balcony with glasses of wine, laughing, touching, looking like a couple. Diane said the woman's name was Rebecca. She worked at Jake's company. Same floor. They'd been meeting at this condo every weeknight for at least the past 2 months, maybe longer. The condo was leased under Rebecca's name. Diane had checked. It wasn't some random hotel or a friend's place. This woman had a whole separate apartment, and my husband was spending 2.5 hours there every single night while I thought he was home putting our kids to bed. I sat there staring at those photos, and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt cold, like someone had flipped a switch and all the warmth drained out of me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a drunken kiss at a work party. This was a routine, a system, a double life. And here's where it gets absurd. I went home that night and acted completely normal. I made dinner. I asked Jake about his day. I listened to him complain about a project at work, probably the same project that gave him cover to see Rebecca. I tucked the kids into bed. I kissed him goodnight, and the whole time I was thinking about how I was going to burn his entire world down. But I didn't do it that night. I did something smarter. I called a lawyer the next morning, a good one, the kind who doesn't mess around. I explained the situation and showed her Diane's report. She told me exactly what to do. Secure our assets, document everything. Get copies of bank statements, tax returns, titles, deeds. Make sure my name was on everything it needed to be on. Don't let him know I knew. Not yet. So that's what I did. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly building a case. I pulled financial records. I found charges to restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms booked on nights he said he was working late at the office. I contacted our accountant and made sure I had access to every account. I even opened a separate bank account in my name only and started transferring money. Not everything. Just enough to make sure I wasn't left high and dry if he tried to pull something. Jake had no idea. He kept up his routine, kept texting me at 6:45, kept pretending. I almost admired the commitment. Almost. Then one Saturday while Jake was at the gym, I packed his things, every single item he owned. Clothes, toiletries, shoes, that stupid expensive watch his dad gave him. I packed it all into suitcases and garbage bags and loaded them into my car. I changed the locks, called a locksmith and had new deadbolts installed on every door. Then I drove to Rebecca's condo. I didn't knock, I just left everything in the hallway outside her door. The suitcases, the bags, and on top of it all, I left an envelope. Inside were divorce papers my lawyer had drawn up. Signed, filed, official. And paper clipped to the front page were 2 photos. One of our daughter smiling in her kindergarten graduation cap. One of our son holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. I wrote a note on the back of one of the photos. It said, "Hope the affair was worth losing this." I didn't wait around to see their reaction. I didn't need to. I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch in the quiet house. My phone started ringing about an hour later. Jake, then Rebecca, then Jake again. I didn't answer. I just let it ring. Eventually, I blocked both their numbers. Jake showed up at the house that night banging on the door. The new locks held. He yelled through the window that we needed to talk, that I was being crazy, that I didn't understand. I told him through the door that my lawyer would be in touch, and if he didn't leave, I'd call the police. He left. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. Jake tried everything. Apologies, excuses. He said it wasn't serious. He said Rebecca meant nothing. He said he'd end it. He said he loved me. He said he made a mistake. But here's the thing about mistakes. Mistakes are accidents. What Jake did was a choice he made every single night for months, a choice to lie to my face, a choice to let Emma stay late and pay her extra hours while he played house with someone else, a choice to send me recycled photos of our kids while he sat on a balcony drinking wine with his coworker. That's not a mistake. That's a plan. The divorce went through faster than I expected. Jake didn't fight for custody, didn't fight for the house. I think part of him knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. My lawyer made sure I got everything I asked for. The house, primary custody, child support, half his retirement. He kept his precious condo girlfriend and whatever was left of his reputation at work. I'm doing okay now, better than okay actually. The kids adjusted. They see Jake every other weekend and he's trying to play Dad of the Year to make up for lost time. It's pathetic, but whatever. Emma still babysits sometimes and she never asks what happened. I think she knows. Sometimes I think about that comment she made, about how Jake must work really late, how one offhand sentence unraveled everything. I'm grateful for it though, because I could have gone years not knowing, years of fake texts and reused photos and lies told with a straight face. Lies about whereabouts seem to be a running theme tonight, but the next person didn't just lie about location. They lied about their entire relationship status while planning a wedding. I thought I knew what love looked like. Derek proposed to me at my family's Christmas party, right in front of everyone, my parents, my aunts and uncles, my little cousins running around with candy canes. He got down on one knee in the living room while Mariah Carey played in the background, and he pulled out this custom ring he'd apparently been designing for months. It had my birthstone and everything. There were actual tears in his eyes when he asked me to marry him. Everyone cheered. My mum cried. My dad shook his hand. I said yes, because of course I said yes. This was the guy I'd been dating for a year and a half. The guy who texted me good morning every single day. The guy who met me for lunch breaks and brought me coffee when I had early shifts. Why wouldn't I marry him? 2 weeks later, I got a message on Instagram from someone named Vanessa. The message was short and direct. It said, "Are you the girl Derek's cheating on me with?" I stared at my phone for a solid minute, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke or scam. I didn't recognize her name. I didn't recognize her profile picture. But when I clicked on her account and started scrolling, my stomach dropped. Because there was Derek in her photos, lots of photos. Photos from dates, photos from trips, photos from what looked like anniversaries and birthdays. And these weren't old photos. These were recent. Some of them were from the same weeks I had photos with him. I responded to her message. I said, "I'm not cheating with anyone. I'm his fiancé. He proposed 2 weeks ago." She wrote back almost immediately. She said she'd been dating Derek for 3 years. 3 years? I'd only known him for 18 months. She said he told her he traveled for work, that he was in sales and had to go out of town constantly. That's why they didn't live together. That's why he wasn't around some weekends. That's why his schedule was so unpredictable. Except he wasn't traveling. He was with me. We started comparing everything: photos, text messages, timelines. I sent her screenshots of our conversations. She sent me hers. We mapped out his entire double life like we were detectives on a crime show. When he told her he was in Denver for a conference, he was actually at my apartment watching movies. When he told me he had a family emergency out of state, he was at her place for her birthday. He'd been rotating between us like we were shifts at a job, and the worst part? He was good at it. He never slipped up, never called me by the wrong name, never got his stories confused. This man had been running 2 completely separate relationships with the same level of care and detail most people can barely manage with one. Vanessa and I kept talking. At first it was just shock and anger and trying to piece together how this was even possible. But then something shifted. We both realized we weren't mad at each other. We were mad at him. And, honestly, we kind of liked each other. She had a sharp sense of humor. She was straightforward. She didn't play games. And we both agreed on one thing. Derek needed to face both of us at the same time. This is where patience finally snapped. Valentine's Day was coming up. Derek had made plans with both of us, naturally. He told Vanessa he'd finally have a free evening and wanted to take her somewhere special. He told me he wanted to celebrate our first Valentine's Day as an engaged couple. Same night, same city. We let him keep both plans. Vanessa found out he'd made reservations at this upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths and candles on every table. She called and confirmed his reservation. Then I called and made one for myself. Same time slot. We coordinated the whole thing over text, like we were planning a heist. The night of, I showed up first. I got a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. Vanessa arrived about 10 minutes later and sat at a table right next to mine. We didn't acknowledge each other. We both just sat there with our menus, waiting. And then Derek walked in. He was wearing a suit. He had flowers. He looked so confident, so pleased with himself, like he was about to have the perfect romantic evening. He scanned the room looking for Vanessa, and that's when he saw her. But he also saw me. At the same time. I watched his face go through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, recognition, dread, and then just pure frozen terror. He stood there in the doorway holding a bouquet of roses like a statue. Vanessa and I both stood up at the exact same moment. We walked over to his table, one on each side. The host tried to step in, but we were already moving. Derek opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He just stood there. Vanessa looked at me. I looked at her. We didn't even have to say anything. We'd already planned this part. We both picked up our wine glasses, full glasses of red wine we'd ordered just for this, and we poured them directly on his head. Slowly, deliberately. The wine ran down his face, soaked into his suit, dripped onto the flowers. He didn't move. He didn't even try to stop us. And then the entire restaurant started clapping. I'm serious. People at other tables put down their forks and started applauding like they'd just watched the finale of a play. Someone whistled. The host was trying not to smile. Derek just stood there dripping, staring at both of us like he couldn't believe this was real. Vanessa said, "Enjoy your Valentine's Day, Derek." I didn't say anything. I just turned around, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Vanessa was right behind me. We left him standing there in the middle of the restaurant, soaked in wine, holding wilted roses, while strangers clapped. You almost have to admire the audacity of thinking you can juggle 2 entire relationships in the same town and never get caught. We went to a bar down the street and got drinks. Real drinks this time, not props for revenge. We talked for hours, swapped stories about all the red flags we'd missed, all the excuses that seemed reasonable at the time but were so obviously lies in hindsight. She told me about the time he claimed he had food poisoning and couldn't see her for 3 days. Turns out those were the 3 days he took me to the coast for my birthday. I told her about the weekend he said he had to visit his sick aunt. He was actually at her place helping her move furniture. It was almost comical how perfectly he'd managed to keep us separate. Almost. Derek tried to call both of us that night. Then he tried texting. Then he started leaving voicemails, long rambling voicemails, where he tried to explain himself, apologize, beg for another chance. We blocked him, both of us. Same time. Vanessa posted a photo on Instagram the next day, just the 2 of us at the bar, holding our drinks, smiling. The caption said, "When you find out you're not the only one, but you make a friend anyway." It got hundreds of likes. People from our town commented asking what happened. Word spread fast. His reputation never recovered. This was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than wildfire. People talked. His co-workers found out. His friends found out. His family found out. I heard from a mutual friend that his mum called him crying, asking how he could do something like that. Vanessa heard he got quietly let go from his sales job a few months later because clients didn't want to work with him anymore. Turns out being known as the guy who got publicly humiliated for cheating on 2 women at once isn't great for business. I kept the ring for a while, not because I wanted it, but because I didn't know what to do with it. Eventually I sold it and split the money with Vanessa. We used it to take a trip together, just the 2 of us, to somewhere Derek had promised both of us he'd take us, but never did. We sent him a postcard. It just said, "Thanks for the vacation." Double lives and secret partners are one thing, but sometimes the accusation of cheating comes from the actual cheater themselves. Projection at its finest. I thought Melissa and I had a solid relationship. 3 years together, talking about moving in, her parents already asking when I was going to propose. Sure, we had our issues like any couple, but nothing that seemed unfixable. Then, about 4 months ago, everything shifted. She became obsessed with my phone. I'm talking checking it while I was in the shower, going through my messages while I slept, demanding to see my screen whenever I laughed at something. At first, I tried to be understanding. Maybe she'd been hurt before. Maybe she just needed reassurance. So I gave her my passwords: Instagram, Facebook, even my email. I had nothing to hide, but it didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. She started accusing me of cheating with coworkers. Women I barely interacted with suddenly became these elaborate affairs in her mind. Jessica from accounting, who I'd maybe spoken to twice. Apparently, we were having secret lunch dates. Sarah from the marketing team, who was literally engaged. Melissa was convinced we had something going on. I'd come home from work and face an interrogation. Where was I at 2:15? Who was that blonde woman in the background of the office photo someone posted? Why did I take 17 minutes to respond to her text? I started documenting my every move just to defend myself, sending her photos throughout the day, sharing my location constantly, checking in every hour. It was exhausting. My friends noticed I'd become paranoid and jumpy, always looking at my phone to make sure I hadn't missed one of her messages. Chris, my best friend since college, told me it seemed unhealthy. He said Melissa was being controlling and I should consider couples therapy, or maybe taking a break. Looking back now, the irony is almost painful. Things came to a head about 6 weeks ago. Melissa sat me down one evening, tears streaming down her face, and told me our relationship problems were destroying her mental health. She said she needed space to clear her head and work on herself. She'd found this wellness retreat in Northern California, a week-long program focused on meditation, yoga, and emotional healing. All women, very exclusive, no phones allowed so she could truly disconnect. She said she needed this to figure out if she could trust me again, if we had a future together. I felt guilty, like somehow I'd driven her to this point, even though I'd never done anything wrong. So I told her to go. Take the time, work on herself, and we'd talk when she got back. I even offered to pay for half of it since the retreat wasn't cheap. She kissed me, thanked me for being understanding, and said this was exactly why she loved me. 2 days before she was supposed to leave, Chris called me, said he needed a guy's weekend, wanted to go on a solo camping trip up the coast to disconnect and do some thinking. He'd been stressed at work, dealing with some personal stuff, just needed to unplug. I thought it was great that we were both taking time for self-care. I told him Melissa was doing the same thing, going to her retreat. We laughed about how we'd both become the kind of people who needed wellness weekends. He asked when Melissa was leaving. I told him Friday morning. He said he was heading out Friday afternoon. Different directions, different vibes, but same idea. That Friday, I helped Melissa pack. She had yoga mats, meditation cushions, journals, all this wellness gear. She kissed me goodbye, told me not to worry, and said she'd see me in a week. I watched her drive away and felt hopeful. Maybe this would fix things, but something nagged at me. Call it intuition, call it paranoia from months of being accused of cheating, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling. Melissa had been so secretive about the retreat details, wouldn't let me see the brochure, got defensive when I asked the name of the place, said it was exclusive and they valued privacy. And Chris had been acting strange too, distant the past few weeks, cancelling plans, being vague about his camping spot. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being crazy, that Melissa's paranoia had infected me. But by Saturday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. We had a shared family phone plan, one of those things we'd set up to save money. I'd never used the location tracking feature before, felt like it violated her privacy. But now, with her supposedly on a silent retreat with no phone access, I figured I'd just check to make sure she'd arrived safely. I opened the app, her location loaded. Big Sur. Not at any wellness retreat center. At a specific address that when I Google mapped it, showed a luxury cabin rental. Ocean views, hot tub, king bed, the works. $250 a night. My hands started shaking. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the retreat had changed locations. Maybe this was part of the program. But then I did something I'm not proud of. I checked Chris's Instagram. He'd posted a story 8 hours earlier. Just a photo of a sunset over the ocean with the caption, "Much needed reset." The location tag said Big Sur, the exact same area as Melissa. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My best friend, my girlfriend, the two people I trusted most in the world. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes just staring at my phone, refreshing their locations over and over like maybe the app was wrong. But no, they were right there. Same latitude, same longitude. Together. Then came the breaking point. I opened my laptop and pulled up the address of the cabin. It was a rental property listed on one of those vacation sites. I scrolled through the photos, romantic getaway, couples retreat, perfect for a private escape. The reviews talked about how isolated it was, how you could spend days without seeing another soul. I didn't think. I just got in my car and started driving. 6 hours from Los Angeles to Big Sur, and I made it in 5. I drove like a maniac, running through every scenario in my head. Maybe they'd run into each other by coincidence. Maybe they were comforting each other about their respective relationship and work problems. Maybe I was about to make a huge mistake and ruin everything over a misunderstanding. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. I pulled up to the cabin around midnight. Melissa's car was parked out front, right next to Chris's truck. The cabin lights were on, and I could see movement through the windows. I sat in my car for a minute, camera ready on my phone, just watching, building up courage or maybe giving them one last chance to prove me wrong. I walked up to the door and knocked, 3 solid knocks that echoed in the quiet night. Footsteps inside, the door opened. Chris stood there in nothing but his boxers. His face went from confused to shocked to pale in about 2 seconds. Behind him, I heard Melissa scream from what I assumed was the bedroom. Not a scared scream, a caught scream. I held up my phone, already recording. Chris started stammering, trying to block the doorway, but I stepped past him. The cabin was exactly like the photos. Romantic lighting, half-empty wine bottles on the counter, 2 plates from dinner, and there was Melissa, rushing out of the bedroom in one of Chris's t-shirts, her hair messy, face flushed. She froze when she saw me. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the ocean outside and my phone still recording. The thing that got me wasn't even the betrayal itself in that moment. It was the wellness retreat bag sitting by the door, the yoga mat, the meditation cushions, all the props she'd packed to sell the lie, and next to it, Chris's camping gear. His tent still in its bag, clearly never used. Melissa found her voice first, started crying, saying it wasn't what it looked like. They were just talking. This was the first time. Please, let her explain. Chris just stood there, silent, looking at the floor like if he didn't make eye contact, this wasn't really happening. I didn't yell, didn't scream, just kept recording and asked one question. How long? Melissa kept crying, not answering. So I asked Chris. He finally looked at me and said 6 months. 6 months of my girlfriend and my best friend sneaking around. 6 months of her accusing me of cheating while she was doing exactly that. 6 months of him listening to me talk about relationship problems he was causing. You almost have to admire the audacity of using her fake wellness retreat and his fake camping trip as their cover story. I walked out, got in my car, drove to a parking lot overlooking the ocean, and just sat there until sunrise, watching the video over and over. In the clear light of morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. Wasn't going to let Melissa spin this into somehow being my fault. Wasn't going to protect Chris's reputation while mine got dragged through the mud. I posted the video to Facebook. Not the whole thing, just enough. Melissa opening the door in Chris's shirt. Chris standing there in his boxers. The cabin interior with the wine and candles. And I wrote a caption. Short and simple. Here's the wellness retreat that was supposed to save our relationship. Guess it worked better for her and my best friend Chris. I tagged them both, tagged all our mutual friends, and then I waited. The response was immediate. Within an hour, I had 50 messages. People who'd known us for years, who'd been to dinners with the 4 of us, who'd had no idea. Melissa's parents, who'd been pressuring me to propose for months, were among the first to comment. Her mum just wrote, "I'm so sorry," with a string of broken heart emojis. Her dad called me directly, apologizing, saying they had no idea, asking if I was okay. Melissa called me 17 times in the first 2 hours. Chris sent a long text that I deleted without reading. Mutual friends started choosing sides. Most chose mine once they heard the full story, heard about the 6 months of her accusing me of cheating, about how calculated it had been. The video got shared. A lot. More than I expected. People were outraged on my behalf. Melissa's phone number got out somehow, and strangers started calling her. Chris got fired from his job after it went viral in our industry circles, and his boss decided he was a liability to the company culture. Part of me felt guilty about that, but mostly I just felt vindicated. They'd humiliated me for months, made me question my sanity, made me feel like I was the problem. And now everyone knew the truth. Melissa showed up at my apartment 3 days later. I didn't let her in. She stood outside my door, crying, begging me to take the video down. Said her life was ruined, her family was ashamed, she'd lost friends, people were harassing her online. She said she made a mistake, that she loved me, that therapy could fix this. I told her through the closed door that her wellness retreat had worked. She'd gotten clarity, and so had I. Then I suggested she call Chris since they'd put so much effort into being together. Apparently they'd already broken up. Turns out a relationship built on betrayal doesn't have a great foundation. At least that betrayal was straightforward, but some manipulators go further, actually rewriting history to paint themselves as victims. I thought the hardest part of breaking up with Jordan would be moving on. Turns out the hardest part was watching them rewrite our entire relationship, like some kind of revisionist historian with a victim complex. We'd been together for 3 years. 3 years of what I genuinely believed was a partnership, even if it ended badly. But apparently Jordan had a different story to tell, and spoiler alert, I was the villain. It started small. A mutual friend reached out about 2 weeks after the breakup, asking if I was okay. I said yeah, processing things but doing fine. She got this weird look on her face and said she was glad to hear I was getting help. Getting help? For what? That's when she told me Jordan had been telling people I was controlling, that I'd isolated Jordan from friends, monitored their phone, and had severe jealousy issues that made the relationship unbearable. Jordan was apparently the brave survivor who finally escaped. I just sat there staring at my phone like it had grown a second screen. Controlling? I was the one who encouraged Jordan to go out with friends. Jealous? Jordan was the one who needed to know where I was at all times and would blow up my phone if I didn't respond within 10 minutes. This wasn't just a difference in perspective. This was a completely fabricated alternative reality, where I was some kind of monster and Jordan was the long-suffering victim. The thing is, I'm a chronic documenter. I keep emails. I screenshot important conversations. I've journaled since I was 15. It's not because I'm paranoid. It's just how I process things. I like having a record, and thank God for that habit because I had receipts for literally everything. Every text where Jordan berated me for talking to a female coworker. Every email where they demanded access to my bank accounts. Every journal entry where I wrote about walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger another explosion. I didn't do anything with it at first. I figured people who actually knew me would see through the lies, and everyone else didn't matter. Let Jordan spin whatever narrative helped them sleep at night. I'd take the high road, move on, be the bigger person. All that mature breakup advice you're supposed to follow. Then Jordan's new partner contacted me. Her name was Ashley, and she sent me this long, concerned message on Instagram. She'd been dating Jordan for about a month and wanted to reach out woman to woman because she was worried about me. Jordan had told her everything, apparently. How I'd been psychologically abusive, how I'd threatened Jordan, how the relationship had left Jordan with trust issues and anxiety. Ashley said she understood how hard it must be to accept that I'd caused harm, but she hoped I was in therapy working through my issues. She wanted me to know she wasn't angry at me, just concerned, and she hoped I could find healing. I read that message 3 times. This complete stranger was offering me compassion for abuse I never committed, based on lies my ex had told her. And she seemed so sincere, so genuinely worried about both of us. That's when I realized Jordan wasn't just protecting their ego. They were actively building a new relationship on a foundation of lies about me. Ashley deserved to know the truth. I spent an entire weekend compiling everything. Screenshots of texts where Jordan called me worthless, stupid, and told me no one else would ever want me. Emails where they tracked my location and accused me of cheating if I stopped at the grocery store on my way home. Photos of the credit card statements showing how Jordan had racked up $8,000 in debt on my card without asking. I organized it chronologically in a PDF, with dates, context, and my journal entries from those periods describing how each incident made me feel. It ended up being 40 pages. 40 pages of documented emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and gaslighting. I sent it to Ashley with a simple message saying I understood if she didn't believe me, but I thought she deserved to see the full picture before getting more involved with Jordan. I told her to make her own decision about what to believe, but these were the facts as they actually happened. She responded 6 hours later. Short message. Just said thank you for sending it. She needed time to process, and she appreciated me reaching out. I figured that was the end of it. Maybe she'd confront Jordan, maybe she wouldn't, but at least I'd tried to warn her. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days later, I got a message from someone named Kyle. He'd been in a relationship with Jordan 4 years ago, right before me. Ashley had done some digging after receiving my PDF and found Kyle through Jordan's old Facebook photos. She'd reached out to him asking if he'd had a similar experience. His response was basically yes, and did she have any exes she could connect him with, because he'd been trying to find other people Jordan had dated. Kyle had the same story. After their breakup, Jordan told everyone Kyle was emotionally abusive, controlling, and had anger issues. Jordan's friends and family rallied around them. Kyle tried to defend himself, but eventually gave up and moved to a different city just to escape the reputation Jordan had built for him. He'd kept evidence too, thinking maybe someday he'd need it, but never found the right moment to use it. Then Ashley connected me with someone named Maria. Same pattern. 3-year relationship, messy breakup. Jordan immediately flipped the script and painted themselves as the victim of Maria's verbal abuse and manipulation. Maria had screenshots, emails, medical records from a therapist she'd started seeing because Jordan had convinced her she was the problem. The three of us started comparing notes, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Jordan would love bomb at the beginning, slowly isolate their partner from friends and family, establish financial control, then escalate to verbal and emotional abuse. When the partner finally left or pushed back, Jordan would immediately start telling everyone the partner had been the abusive one. Jordan would cry to friends, post vague social media updates about surviving toxic relationships, and bond with the new partner over their trauma from the previous relationship. It was a system, a practiced, repeating system that had destroyed at least 4 people's reputations that we knew of. Ashley suggested we create a shared document, not to blast Jordan publicly or get revenge, just to have a centralized record in case anyone else came forward or needed proof. We put together a Google Doc with all our evidence, timelines of our relationships, and the patterns we'd identified. We kept it private, password protected, only shared with people who specifically asked or who were entering a relationship with Jordan. We didn't have to wait long. About 3 weeks after we created the document, Ashley told us Jordan's mother had reached out to her. Jordan had apparently told their family that Ashley had dumped them out of nowhere, breaking their heart, and the family wanted to check on her. The mum said she hoped there were no hard feelings and that she was sorry things hadn't worked out for Jordan, who'd already been through so much with previous relationships. Ashley, to her credit, was done playing nice. She sent Jordan's mother access to our shared document with a message saying she thought the family deserved to know the truth about Jordan's pattern of behavior. She explained that she'd found 3 previous partners with identical stories and evidence, and while she understood this would be hard to hear, they should know what Jordan was actually doing to people. Jordan's mother called me 2 days later. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. She was crying before she even said hello. Sobbing, actually. She said she was Jordan's mum, and she needed to apologize to me. She'd believed everything Jordan told her about me. She'd thought I was this terrible person who'd hurt her child. She'd even bad-mouthed me to other family members, to friends at church, to neighbors who asked why Jordan seemed so sad. But after reading the document, after seeing the pattern across 4 different relationships, after looking at actual evidence instead of just Jordan's word, she realized her child had been lying, not just to protect themselves, but systematically, deliberately, to destroy other people while playing victim. She said she didn't know how to process that the person she raised could do something like that to multiple people. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be angry at her for believing Jordan without question, but mostly I just felt tired. I told her I appreciated the apology, that I understood she was just trying to support her child, and that I hoped Jordan would eventually get help. She asked if there was anything she could do to make it right. I said she could stop enabling the pattern, stop believing Jordan's victim narratives without evidence, and maybe encourage therapy. She thanked me, apologized again, and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, thinking about how Jordan's carefully constructed narrative had finally collapsed under the weight of its own repetition. Kyle texted the group chat that night saying Jordan had blocked him on all platforms. Maria said the same thing happened to her. Ashley reported that Jordan had sent her a long message calling her a traitor, saying she'd conspired with jealous exes to ruin Jordan's life, and that she'd regret believing lies over someone who actually loved her. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. Here's the thing about people who rewrite history. They assume everyone else has the same relationship with truth that they do. Jordan genuinely seemed to believe that if you say something confidently enough, it becomes real, that feelings matter more than facts. That being the first person to tell a story means you get to control the narrative forever. But documentation doesn't lie. Timestamps don't change. Screenshots don't develop false memories. And when you've hurt enough people the same way, eventually they find each other and compare notes. I don't know what happened to Jordan after that. I blocked them on everything and moved on. Last I heard from Ashley, Jordan had moved to a different state and was posting on social media about fresh starts and leaving toxic people behind. The irony was apparently lost on them. Sometimes I think about that 40-page PDF, how it started as just self-defense, just me trying to warn one person, and ended up being the thread that unraveled years of manipulation. How 3 strangers became allies because we'd all survived the same treatment and kept the receipts. Jordan wanted to rewrite our history, make themselves the hero and me the villain, control the narrative so thoroughly that everyone would believe their version without question. They put in all that effort spinning lies, managing everyone's perception, playing the victim to anyone who'd listen. They thought they were untouchable because it had worked before. The previous exes had slunk away quietly, too tired or defeated to fight back. Why would I be any different? But here's what Jordan didn't account for. They didn't consider that some people document everything, that lies require perfect memory, but truth just requires access to what actually happened, that patterns become visible when you zoom out far enough, that victims of the same abuser eventually find each other. Rewriting the past is manipulative, but at least it's passive. Some people actively weaponize blame, pointing fingers while hiding massive secrets of their own. My husband Trevor blamed me for everything. His weight gain, my fault for not cooking healthier meals. His career stagnation, my fault for not being supportive enough of his ambitions. His depression, definitely my fault for not making him happy. Our sexless marriage, you guessed it, my fault for not being attractive enough anymore. For years I heard the same refrain. You don't support me. You don't understand me. You're the reason I'm unhappy. And like an idiot, I believed him. I tried harder, cooked different meals, encouraged his career moves, suggested therapy, bought new clothes. Did everything I could think of to be the wife he apparently needed. Nothing worked. He just got more distant and more critical. Started working late 3 or 4 nights a week. Stopped coming to family events. Barely spoke to me at home except to point out something else I was doing wrong. I thought we were falling apart because I wasn't enough. That's what he told me, so that's what I believed. The truth started to reveal itself on a random Wednesday when I was reconciling our credit card statement. I'm the one who handles our finances, so I see all the charges. Usually it's boring stuff, groceries, gas, his work lunches. But this month there were hotel charges, 3 of them, all on nights Trevor had told me he was working late at the office. I sat there staring at the statement, trying to make it make sense. Maybe work events. But he'd never mentioned staying at a hotel. Maybe business meetings. But he worked in IT, not sales. There was no reason for him to be at hotels, unless there was a reason I didn't want to think about. I checked previous statements, found more hotel charges going back months, always on his late work nights, always the same hotel chain, different locations. My hands were shaking as I pulled up our phone records online. Trevor's usage looked normal. Calls to me, to his parents, to a few friends, nothing suspicious. But then I noticed something. Data usage, lots of it on an app I didn't recognize. I googled the app name. It was for managing multiple phone numbers through one device. A burner phone app. Trevor had a burner phone number. The level of planning that required. The intentionality of it. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake. This was systematic deception. I knew I needed more information before confronting him, so I did something I'm not proud of but don't regret. I installed monitoring software on his laptop, while he was at work, the kind that logs keystrokes and takes screenshots, legal in our state for spouses to do without consent. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The screenshots started coming through that same day, and what I found wasn't what I expected. Trevor wasn't having an affair with a woman. He was in a full relationship with a man named Marcus. Not a hookup, not a secret casual thing, a relationship. With anniversary celebrations and couple photos and plans for future vacations together. I scrolled through months of messages between them. They'd been together for 4 years. 4 years of Trevor living an entirely separate life with this man. They had inside jokes, pet names. Marcus called him baby. Trevor sent heart emojis. They talked about their future together, about Trevor finally leaving me once his inheritance came through from his grandmother's estate. Here's where it gets absurd. While Trevor was telling Marcus he was miserable in his marriage and couldn't wait to leave me, he was simultaneously telling me that I was the reason he was miserable, and I needed to try harder to fix our relationship. He was literally using me as the villain in both narratives. The unsupportive wife holding him back from happiness with Marcus, the insufficient wife who made him unhappy at home, and Marcus had no idea I existed. In their messages, Trevor referred to his living situation vaguely, talked about roommate issues and housing complications. Marcus thought Trevor lived alone, 4 years, and this man had no idea his boyfriend was married. I sat with this information for 3 days, cried, raged, felt stupid for believing Trevor's criticisms of me, felt sympathy for his obvious internal struggle with his sexuality. Then I felt anger again because, regardless of his struggle, he'd chosen to handle it by wasting a decade of my life and blaming me for his own unhappiness. I decided to contact Marcus, found him easily through Trevor's message history, sent him a message from a new email address, told him who I was, attached our marriage certificate, told him we needed to talk. Marcus called me within an hour. He was devastated, had no idea. Trevor had told him he was single, that he'd come out to his family years ago, that they were building a life together. I told Marcus everything, the blame, the late nights, the parallel life. We compared notes, realized Trevor had been lying to both of us about different things to maintain both relationships. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Marcus said he wanted to confront Trevor first, before I did anything. I agreed. I wanted Trevor to know his whole house of cards was collapsing. Marcus invited Trevor to dinner at their usual spot. I showed up 15 minutes into their meal. The look on Trevor's face when he saw me walking toward their table was something I'll remember forever. Pure panic. He tried to introduce me as a friend. I sat down and asked Marcus if he wanted to tell Trevor what he knew, or if I should. Marcus told him everything. Trevor tried to deny it at first, then minimize it, then blame both of us for not understanding how hard this had been for him. Like we were the problem, like his systematic deception of 2 people who cared about him was somehow our fault for existing. I told Trevor I wanted a divorce. He actually had the audacity to ask if we could go to counseling first. I laughed, told him I'd filed the papers that morning, cited adultery with specific details, named Marcus in the filing, everything documented. Trevor's face went grey. He asked me not to make this public, said his parents couldn't know, his ultra-conservative parents who went to church 3 times a week and had very vocal opinions about traditional marriage. The same parents whose inheritance he'd been waiting for to fund his new life with Marcus. I told him he should have thought about that before spending 4 years lying to everyone. The divorce mediation was brutal for Trevor. His lawyer advised him to settle quickly and quietly, but my lawyer had filed everything publicly. Court records are public records, and Trevor's parents hired a private investigator when they got wind something was wrong. They found everything: the hotel records, the messages, the photos of Trevor and Marcus together. His inheritance vanished overnight. His mother called me crying, apologizing for raising a son who could treat his wife this way. His father stopped speaking to him entirely, cut him out of the will. The estate that was supposed to fund Trevor's new life with Marcus got redirected to charity. Marcus ended their relationship too. Said he couldn't trust someone who'd lied that extensively to everyone in his life. Last I heard, Trevor was living alone in a studio apartment, estranged from his family, single, and finally dealing with the consequences of his choices. I'm dating again now, taking it slow, seeing a therapist who's helping me unpack years of being told I was the problem when I wasn't, learning to trust my instincts again, building a life that isn't centered around trying to fix someone else's manufactured complaints about me. The most freeing part, realizing that all those years of him blaming me for his unhappiness had nothing to do with me at all. His weight, his career, his depression, our sexless marriage, none of it was my fault. It was all him dealing badly with his own internal conflicts and making me the scapegoat. I hope he eventually finds peace with who he is, but I also hope he learns that you don't get to destroy other people's lives just because you're struggling with your own truth. Hidden relationships are devastating, but sometimes the weapon isn't a secret lover. It's a fake screenshot designed to destroy everything you've built. I met David at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning. We both reached for the last blueberry muffin at the same time, laughed about it, and ended up sharing it while talking for 3 hours. It sounds like something out of a romance novel, and honestly, that's exactly what it felt like. He was kind, funny, had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We started dating a week later, and for 8 months everything was perfect. Not perfect in the fake Instagram way, but perfect in the way that matters. We had inside jokes, we knew each other's coffee orders, we talked about future plans like they were actual possibilities and not just daydreams. His sister Kelly was part of the package. She was around a lot, maybe more than I expected, but David was close with his family and I respected that. She was always polite to me, always smiling, always asking how I was doing. I thought we got along fine. I had no idea she was planning to destroy everything. It happened on a Sunday. David called me and his voice sounded different, flat, cold. He said we needed to talk and that he was coming over. When he showed up at my apartment, he wouldn't even look at me. He just pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. It was supposedly from my Instagram account. Messages between me and Kelly's ex-boyfriend, a guy named Tyler that I'd met maybe twice at family gatherings. The messages were explicit, flirty, sexual, things I would never say to anyone, let alone some random guy I barely knew. I stared at the screen trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It had my profile picture, my username. The Instagram interface looked completely real, but I'd never sent those messages. I'd never even had a conversation with Tyler beyond basic pleasantries. I told David that. I begged him to believe me. I showed him my actual Instagram, my actual DMs with Tyler, which were non-existent because we'd never messaged. But he wouldn't listen. Kelly had shown him the screenshot. His sister. Why would she lie? He left, just walked out of my apartment and out of my life. I tried calling, texting, showing up at his place. He blocked me everywhere. His friends stopped talking to me. His family, the people I'd had dinner with dozens of times, treated me like I didn't exist. I lost the love of my life over something I didn't do, and I had no way to prove my innocence. The next 6 months were the worst of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I replayed every interaction with Kelly trying to figure out what I'd missed. I went over that screenshot 1,000 times, looking for some obvious sign that it was fake, but it looked so real. I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I'd been hacked, if someone had access to my account, if there was any explanation that didn't involve Kelly deliberately sabotaging my relationship. That's when everything unraveled. I was talking to a friend who worked in tech, just venting about the whole situation, and she suggested I hire a digital forensics expert, someone who could actually analyze the screenshot and tell me if it was legitimate. I hadn't even considered that as an option. I thought screenshots were screenshots, that you couldn't really prove or disprove them. I was wrong. I found an expert online, a guy named Marcus who specialized in digital evidence for court cases. I sent him the screenshot David had shown me, which I'd managed to get a copy of from a mutual friend. Marcus got back to me in 3 days with a full report. The screenshot was fake, completely fabricated. The metadata was wrong. The font didn't match Instagram's actual font. The timestamps were impossible based on when I was actually online. The whole thing had been created using photo editing software and then screenshotted to make it look authentic. But that wasn't even the worst part. Marcus traced the IP address of the fake Instagram account that had supposedly sent those messages. It led back to Kelly's apartment. She'd created a fake account using my information, manufactured an entire conversation with Tyler's account, which she'd also likely accessed, screenshotted the whole thing, and presented it to David as evidence of my betrayal. I sat there reading Marcus's report with this weird mix of vindication and rage. I'd been right. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I'd still lost everything because David's sister was apparently so obsessed with him that she couldn't stand seeing him happy with someone else. Yeah, you read that right. I did more digging with Marcus's help and found old emails, old texts Kelly had sent to David over the years. Things that were way beyond normal sibling affection. She'd been in love with her own brother. It was disturbing on every possible level. And when David started getting serious with me, started talking about moving in together, maybe getting engaged, Kelly decided I needed to go. I took everything to David. The forensics report, the IP trace, legal documentation proving the screenshot was fake. I showed up at his door 6 months after he'd walked out of mine, and I handed him a folder full of evidence. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. He opened the folder, he read through everything, and then he just sat down on his couch and put his head in his hands. He wanted to call Kelly right then. I told him to wait. I told him to record the conversation, to get her to admit what she'd done on tape. He didn't want to believe his sister was capable of this, but the evidence was right there in front of him. So he called her on speaker and recorded the whole thing. Kelly didn't even try to deny it. Once David started asking questions, once he mentioned the IP address and the forensic analysis, she broke down and admitted everything. She said she did it because she loved him, because I was taking him away from her, because they were supposed to be together. David's face went grey listening to her. He told her she needed help. He told her to never contact him again. Then he hung up. He turned to me and apologized. He cried. He begged me to forgive him, to give him another chance. He said he should have believed me, that he should have looked deeper into the evidence before throwing away our relationship. And part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me remembered those 8 perfect months and wanted to go back to that. But I couldn't. He'd chosen to believe a screenshot over me. He'd chosen his sister's word over mine without even questioning it. He'd blocked me, shut me out, let me suffer for 6 months while I tried to prove my innocence. And yeah, Kelly was the one who created the lie, but David was the one who believed it without giving me a real chance to defend myself. I told him I was done, that I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change what happened. Then I left. I did press charges against Kelly though. Harassment, defamation. My lawyer said we had a strong case given the evidence. Kelly's lawyer contacted us pretty quickly after that. They wanted to settle out of court. Apparently, Kelly's parents were horrified by what she'd done and wanted to avoid a public trial. We settled for $50,000. I used part of it to pay Marcus and my lawyer. The rest I put toward a fresh start in a new city. David tried to reach out a few times after that. Emails, letters. I didn't respond. I heard through mutual friends that he went to therapy, that he cut Kelly off completely, that he felt terrible about everything. Good. He should. Kelly apparently went to intensive therapy too, though I have no idea if it helped. I don't really care. What I learned from all of this is that screenshots can lie. People can lie. And sometimes the person you trust most will choose to believe a fabricated image over the actual human standing in front of them. I don't date much anymore. I'm careful about who I let into my life. But I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I know my worth now. I know I deserve someone who'll believe me even when the evidence looks bad. Someone who'll ask questions and dig deeper instead of just walking away. Sabotage from a romantic rival is painful, but the betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from within your own family tree. My younger sister Lindsay and I used to be close. Not best friends or anything, but we got along. We had our own lives, our own friend groups, our own identities. That changed about 3 years ago when she started copying me. And I don't mean in a cute little sister way. I mean she literally started rebuilding her entire life to match mine. It started small. I worked in marketing and had just gotten promoted to a senior role at my firm. 6 months later, Lindsay enrolled in marketing courses and started applying for jobs in the same industry. I thought it was coincidence at first, maybe even flattering. Then she joined the same gym I went to, started wearing her hair the same way I did, bought the same car in the same color. She even adopted a cat that looked exactly like mine. My friends noticed before I did. One of them, Rachel, pulled me aside at a party and asked if Lindsay was okay because it was getting kind of weird how much she was mimicking me. I laughed it off, said she was just figuring herself out, that it was a phase. But then Lindsay started befriending my friends directly. She'd show up at places I mentioned I was going to be. She'd text my coworkers asking to grab coffee. She inserted herself into my social circles so smoothly that people started inviting her to things without even thinking about it. The really insidious part started with our parents. Lindsay began positioning herself as the devoted daughter, while painting me as the one who was too busy, too self-absorbed, too career-focused to care about family. She'd call them every day. She'd stop by their house multiple times a week. She'd post photos on social media of her helping mum in the garden or watching old movies with dad. Meanwhile, I was working long hours trying to prove myself in my new position. And every time I'd make plans with my parents, something would happen. I'd schedule dinner with them for Friday night, and Lindsay would call them Thursday saying she wanted to cook for them Friday. They'd cancel on me. I'd planned to take them to a play, and Lindsay would buy tickets to the same show for an earlier date. I'd suggest a weekend visit, and she'd already booked them a trip somewhere. It happened over and over until I started to feel like I was being edged out of my own family. For a year, this went on. A full year of feeling increasingly isolated, increasingly like I was losing some competition I didn't even know I'd entered. My parents started making comments about how Lindsay always made time for them, how she really valued family. The implication was clear. I didn't. I was the selfish one, the one who cared more about my job than my family. Never mind that Lindsay had orchestrated the whole thing. Then I found out the truth completely by accident. I was searching for Lindsay's contact information for a distant cousin who wanted to invite her to something, and I typed her full name into Google instead of my phone contacts. Court records came up. Public court records from the county courthouse website. I clicked on them thinking it had to be a different person with the same name. It wasn't. Lindsay had been arrested 8 months earlier for embezzlement. She'd stolen $30,000 from her previous employer, the job she told everyone she'd been laid off from. There were documents, evidence, dates and amounts and charges. She'd been skimming money from client accounts for over a year before anyone noticed. She'd been caught, arrested, and charged with multiple felonies, and she was awaiting trial. Our parents had no idea. They thought she'd been laid off due to company downsizing. They'd been sympathetic, supportive, helping her with rent while she looked for new work. The whole devoted daughter routine, the constant presence at their house, the family-first attitude, it was all a cover. She had nothing else to do because she was unemployed and facing criminal charges, so she made herself indispensable to them while making me look negligent. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This was calculated. She'd stolen from her company, lied to our parents, and used their sympathy to replace me in the family dynamic. And she'd done it so well that I'd started to believe I actually was the problem. I didn't confront her. Not right away. I needed to think about how to handle this because if I just told our parents, she'd find a way to spin it. She'd gotten so good at playing the victim and making herself look like the good one and me look like the villain. I needed something undeniable. Our parents' anniversary was coming up. 35 years. Lindsay had planned this whole dinner at a nice restaurant, invited extended family, made a slideshow, the works. She was running the show, playing the perfect daughter who cared so much about celebrating their love. I RSVP'd and said I'd be there. Lindsay looked almost annoyed that I was coming, like I was intruding on her event. The night of the dinner, everything was exactly how Lindsay planned it. The private room at the restaurant, the decorations, the catering. She gave this long toast about mom and dad, about marriage, about honesty and family values, and how important it was to always be there for the people you love. People were tearing up. Our parents were beaming. Lindsay was glowing in the attention. That's when everything unraveled. I stood up after her toast and said I wanted to add something. I had my laptop with me, said I'd put together a little tribute as well. The restaurant had a screen for presentations, and Lindsay had used it for her slideshow. I plugged in my computer, but instead of photos, I pulled up the court records, full screen, every page, the charges, the arrest record, the evidence summary, the trial date. The room went completely silent. People stopped eating, stopped drinking, just stared at the screen. Lindsay's face went white. She tried to say something, but nothing came out. Our dad asked what he was looking at. I explained very calmly that these were public court records, showing that Lindsay had been arrested for embezzling $30,000 from her former employer, that she'd lied about being laid off, that she'd been facing felony charges for the past 8 months while playing the devoted daughter card. Lindsay stood up and tried to leave. Our mom grabbed her arm and demanded to know if it was true. Lindsay started crying, saying it was a misunderstanding, that she was going to tell them that it wasn't what it looked like, but the documents were right there. Dates, amounts, charges. There was no way to spin it. Our dad just sat there staring at the screen like he couldn't process what he was seeing. Family members started whispering. Someone asked if this was some kind of joke. I said no, these were legitimate court records. Publicly available, anyone could look them up. Lindsay was supposed to go to trial in 6 weeks. The golden child illusion shattered right there in that restaurant. Every family value toast, every devoted daughter moment, every criticism of me for not being around enough. It all recontextualized in an instant. Lindsay wasn't the good daughter. She was a criminal who'd been using our parents' sympathy as cover while systematically replacing me in the family. Lindsay left, just grabbed her purse and walked out crying. A few relatives followed her, but most people stayed. Our parents wanted answers. I showed them everything. The timeline of when she was arrested versus when she told them she'd been laid off. The amount she stole. The fact that she'd been lying for months while accepting their financial help and emotional support. My mom cried, not because she felt bad for Lindsay, but because she realized how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. She apologized to me, said she'd been too hard on me, that she'd believed Lindsay's version of things without questioning it. My dad was quieter, but I could see he was angry. The kind of deep, disappointed anger that's worse than yelling. Lindsay tried to do damage control over the next few weeks. She called family members, tried to explain, tried to make herself the victim again. But it didn't work this time. Too many people had seen the documents. Too many people had watched her give that toast about honesty right before I exposed her lies. The story spread through our extended family fast. The trial happened 2 months later. She took a plea deal, pleaded guilty to reduced charges, got probation, community service, and restitution payments. Our parents didn't go to the sentencing. That was the part that really drove it home. The parents who would have done anything for her before I exposed the truth didn't even show up to court. Lindsay moved to a different city after that. I think the shame was too much. Or maybe she just needed to start over somewhere people didn't know what she'd done. We don't talk. Our parents have a relationship with her, but it's not what it was. They're civil, they check in, but the trust is gone. I don't feel good about how it happened. Exposing someone at a family event is harsh, but I also don't regret it. She spent a year systematically destroying my relationship with our parents while covering up a serious crime. She made them think I was the selfish one, while she was literally stealing money and lying about it. If I'd just told them privately, she would have found a way to twist it. This way, there was no room for interpretation. Sibling rivalry is one thing, but parental deception runs even deeper, especially when a lie gets buried for decades. My father spent my entire childhood telling us he was self-made. That phrase was practically his personal motto. Self-made, built from nothing, pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He'd say it at dinner when we talked about our days. He'd say it when relatives asked for money. He'd say it when the news mentioned welfare programs or student loan forgiveness or anything that involved people getting help from anyone other than themselves. He had this whole speech he'd give about how handouts breed weakness, how real success only comes from your own sweat and sacrifice, how he started with absolutely nothing and turned it into everything we had. And we believed him. Why wouldn't we? He owned 3 car dealerships. He had investment properties. We lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood and took nice vacations. The man had money, and he'd spent 40 years telling us he earned every single cent of it alone. No help, no advantages, just hard work and determination. My brother Daniel stopped talking to Dad about 6 years ago. It started when Daniel was finishing grad school and asked Dad for help with his student loans. Not even that much, maybe $15,000 to take the edge off, so he could focus on his thesis instead of working 3 jobs. Dad said no. Didn't just say no, actually. He went on this whole rant about how Daniel was being entitled, how asking for handouts showed weak character, how when Dad was that age he was already building his first business with nothing but elbow grease and ambition. Daniel tried to explain that times were different, that education costs weren't the same, that he wasn't asking for a handout but a loan he'd pay back. Dad didn't care. He said if Daniel really wanted that degree, he'd find a way to earn it himself. That's what real men do. Daniel found a way. He worked himself into exhaustion, finished his degree, and cut Dad out of his life completely. Didn't come to holidays, didn't return calls, just gone. And Dad acted like that proved his point, said Daniel was too proud to admit he needed to toughen up. Mom tried to mediate, but Dad wouldn't budge. He was right. He was always right. He was self-made and everyone else was just making excuses. Dad's retirement party happened last month. Big event. Rented out a whole banquet hall. All his business associates, old employees, family, friends. Mom had been planning it for weeks. There were speeches lined up, a slideshow, catered food, open bar. Dad was in his element, shaking hands and telling stories about the old days, about building his empire from scratch. Then his old business partner Marcus got up to give a speech. Marcus had known Dad since the very beginning, back when Dad opened his first dealership in the early 80s. He started talking about the early days, about how hard Dad worked, about the long hours and the risks, normal retirement speech stuff, and then Marcus said something that made the entire room go quiet. He said, and I'll never forget this, he said, of course none of us can forget the generosity of your father, who gave you that initial $500,000 to get started. He said it casually, like it was common knowledge, like everyone in the room already knew. He kept talking about how Dad's father, my grandfather who died when I was 7, had not only given Dad the startup capital, but had also co-signed loans and bailed the business out when it nearly went bankrupt in the late 80s, and then again in the early 90s. I watched my father's face drain of color. People were looking at each other, murmuring. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Marcus kept going, oblivious to the bomb he'd just dropped, talking about how lucky Dad was to have that kind of family support, how not everyone gets that kind of head start. $500,000 in 1982. Money. That's not a small loan. That's not borrowing $100 from your parents. That's a massive financial advantage that my father had pretended didn't exist for 40 years, while he judged everyone else for accepting help, while he called my brother entitled for asking for $15,000, while he ranted about welfare and handouts and weak character. He'd been living off family money the entire time. That's when everything unraveled. The second Marcus finished his speech and sat down, I pulled out my phone and called Daniel. I didn't even think about it. I just knew he needed to know. He answered on the third ring, sounded surprised to hear from me. I told him where I was and what I'd just heard. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Then he said he'd be there in 2 hours. Dad tried to give his own speech after Marcus. Tried to thank everyone for coming, tried to gloss over what had just been revealed. But people were already talking. I could hear fragments of conversations around me. Someone saying, I didn't know his father gave him money. Someone else saying, he always acts like he did it alone. Dad's voice got shaky. He cut the speech short and went to the bar. I sat there waiting for Daniel. Mum came over and asked if I'd really called him. I said yes. She looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. She just nodded and walked away. I found out later she'd known about the money. She'd known the whole time. Dad had sworn her to secrecy when they got married, said it was nobody's business how he started out, that what mattered was what he built. She'd kept his secret for decades while he used it to judge everyone else. Daniel showed up exactly 2 hours later, walked right into that banquet hall still wearing his work clothes. People stopped talking when they saw him. Dad was still at the bar. Daniel walked straight up to him, and the entire room could hear what he said. He said, "So you took $500,000 from Grandpa and then called me entitled for asking for $15,000. He said it loud enough that everyone heard. Dad tried to interrupt, but Daniel kept going. He brought up every time Dad had lectured him about handouts, every speech about bootstraps and self-reliance, every judgment about people who couldn't make it on their own. And then he said, "You're a hypocrite and a liar, and I'm done pretending you're not." Dad tried to defend himself, started saying it was different, that he paid his father back, that he still worked hard. Daniel laughed, actually laughed in his face. He said, "You didn't even tell your own kids the truth. You let us grow up thinking you were some kind of self-made hero when you had more help than most people see in a lifetime." This feels like watching someone's entire persona collapse in real time. People started leaving after that. The party just kind of dissolved. Some of Dad's business friends tried to stay and salvage the evening, but the energy was gone. Mum stood in the corner looking at Dad like she didn't recognize him. I heard later that she'd asked him point blank if there were other lies. He apparently couldn't look her in the eye. She filed for separation 3 months later. Turns out the business money wasn't the only thing he'd lied about. There were other things, financial things he'd hidden. Decisions he'd made without telling her. She said she'd spent 35 years married to someone who apparently thought honesty was optional. She moved into a condo across town. Dad kept the house, but it's just him there now, alone in that big place he claimed he built himself. Daniel and I talk regularly now. We got coffee last week and he told me he feels vindicated, but also kind of sad. Like he wasted 6 years being angry at someone who wasn't even the person he thought he was. I get it. I'm angry too, but also just confused. How do you pretend for 40 years? How do you watch your own kids struggle and refuse to help them while sitting on a lie that big? Dad tried to reach out a few times, sent emails trying to explain, said Marcus got the numbers wrong, that it wasn't that much money, that he did pay it back eventually. But even if that's true, it doesn't change the fundamental dishonesty. He built his entire identity on a false narrative and used it as a weapon against people who didn't deserve it. He judged everyone by a standard he never actually met himself. The dealerships are still running. Dad's still technically successful. But his retirement party basically ended his social life. People in our town know what happened. Know he's not who he claimed to be. Mum's thriving, actually. She joined a book club and started taking painting classes. Says she feels lighter without having to maintain his image anymore. I think about Grandpa sometimes. Wonder if he knew Dad was going to pretend the money didn't exist. Wonder if he'd be disappointed in how Dad used that help as a cudgel against others instead of being grateful for the advantage. We'll never know. But I do know that the man we thought was self-made was actually just really good at lying. Fathers aren't the only parents capable of rewriting history. Sometimes mothers gaslight their own children about the past they lived through together. My mother has always been an expert at rewriting history, not just little details, but entire chapters of my childhood. According to her version of events, I had this picture-perfect upbringing. She was always there for me, always supportive, always present. She'd tell these stories at family gatherings about how she never missed a school play, how she made homemade lunches every day, how she was room mum and PTA president, and basically deserved an award for Mother of the Year. The problem was that none of it was true. I remember my actual childhood pretty clearly. I remember being 7 years old and figuring out how to make mac and cheese because there was no one home to feed me. I remember missing my third grade play because my mum forgot to pick me up from school that day. I remember wearing the same clothes for a week because laundry just didn't get done. I remember a lot of things that didn't match the story she was telling, but whenever I'd bring any of this up, she'd shut me down immediately. "You're remembering wrong," she'd say with this dismissive wave of her hand. "You're being dramatic. I was always there for you. You had everything you needed." She'd say it with such conviction that sometimes I'd question my own memory. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I remembered. Maybe I was the problem. This went on for years, through my teens, through my 20s. Every time I tried to talk about my childhood, she'd gaslight me into thinking I'd invented the whole thing. My siblings, who were significantly older and had moved out by the time things got really bad, believed her version. They remembered a different mum, one who'd been more present when they were young. So when I'd try to explain what it was like for me, they'd look at me like I was making it up for attention. It messed with my head more than I realized. I started therapy in my late 20s for anxiety and depression, and my therapist kept circling back to my childhood. I'd tell her stories about being left alone, about taking care of myself, about feeling invisible. She'd ask questions about where my mum was during all of this, and I'd give vague answers because honestly, I didn't always know. Sometimes she was working. Sometimes she was out with friends. Sometimes she was just in her room with the door locked. My therapist didn't push me to confront my mom about it, but she did suggest something that changed everything. She said sometimes people who've experienced gaslighting need external validation to trust their own memories. She suggested I might find that validation in official records, school files, medical records, anything that documented what was actually happening during those years. I'd never thought about that. I figured my memories were just my memories, that there was no way to prove or disprove them. But she was right. There were records. There were people who'd witnessed what was going on. I just had to find them. I started with my elementary school. I submitted a request for my student records, which took about 3 weeks to process. When the file arrived, it was thicker than I expected. I opened it in my car outside the district office because I couldn't wait to get home. Inside were report cards, attendance records, and notes from teachers. So many notes from teachers. Mrs. Henderson from second grade had written that I frequently came to school in dirty clothes and seemed hungry. She'd noted that she'd started keeping granola bars in her desk specifically for me. Mr. Peters from fourth grade had documented multiple instances of me falling asleep in class and mentioned concerns about my home situation. There were notes from the school counselor about meetings with me where I'd mentioned being alone a lot, being scared at night, not having food in the house. And here's where it gets absurd. There were 2 documented calls to Child Protective Services. 2 separate teachers had been concerned enough about my welfare to report suspected neglect. I had no memory of CPS ever coming to my house, which means either they didn't follow up or my mum had somehow convinced them everything was fine. I sat in that parking lot, reading through years of documented concern from adults who'd noticed what my family had ignored. These weren't my potentially faulty memories. These were contemporaneous accounts from trained professionals who'd seen a child struggling and tried to help. I requested my medical records next. Same story. Missed appointments, notes about my appearing malnourished, a dentist's note expressing concern that I hadn't been brought in for cleanings in over 2 years despite reminders. A pediatrician's documentation that I'd come in for a school physical with an infected cut on my arm that had clearly gone untreated for days. Every piece of paper was validation, proof that I hadn't invented my childhood, that I wasn't being dramatic, that something had actually been wrong. I made copies of everything and organized it into a folder. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but having it felt important. Then came my mum's birthday dinner 2 months later. Big family gathering at my aunt's house. All my siblings, their kids, my mum's sisters and brother. Everyone together for this celebration of the woman who'd supposedly sacrificed everything for her children. My mom was in rare form that night, telling stories about what an amazing mother she'd been, how devoted, how present. She actually said the words, "I gave up everything for my kids," while looking directly at me. My siblings were nodding along, my aunts were smiling, everyone was buying into this narrative of maternal martyrdom, and I just snapped, not in an angry way, but in a calm, clear-headed way, where I suddenly knew exactly what I needed to do. I excused myself, went to my car, and grabbed the folder. I came back inside and waited for a lull in the conversation. Then I very calmly said I had something I wanted to share. I distributed copies to everyone at the table, my mum's siblings, my siblings, their spouses. Everyone got their own set of documentation. I didn't explain it at first, I just let them read, watched their faces change as they went through page after page of teacher concerns, CPS reports, medical notes. My mum realized what was happening and tried to grab the papers, tried to say they were lies, that I was trying to ruin her birthday. But her siblings weren't listening to her anymore. They were reading accounts from multiple professionals spanning several years, all saying the same thing. This child was being neglected. My uncle put down the papers and just looked at my mum. He said he'd suspected something was off back then, that he'd noticed I was always alone when he'd stop by, but he'd never known how bad it was. My aunt started crying, apologizing to me for not doing more. My siblings sat there in shock, finally understanding that their baby sister hadn't been making things up. My mom tried to defend herself, said those teachers didn't understand, that she was doing her best, that she'd been going through a hard time. Which was probably true. She likely was struggling, but that didn't erase what had happened to me. That didn't make the neglect okay, and it definitely didn't give her the right to spend decades denying my reality. She left the party in tears, just grabbed her purse and walked out. Part of me felt bad about ruining her birthday, but a bigger part of me felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I'd spent 30 years being told my memories were wrong, that I was traumatic, that I was the problem. And now I had proof. Now people believed me. My relationship with my mum hasn't recovered. She sent me a long email a few days after the party saying I'd humiliated her, that I was cruel, that I should have talked to her privately if I had issues. But that's the thing. I had tried to talk to her privately for years. and she dismissed me every single time. She'd had countless opportunities to acknowledge what happened, to apologize, to validate my experience. She chose to gaslight me instead. My siblings have been more understanding. They've apologized for not believing me, for siding with mum's version of events. We're working on rebuilding those relationships. My aunts and uncles have reached out, some with their own apologies, some with their own stories about concerns they'd had back then. It's helped, knowing that other people saw it too, that it wasn't just in my head. I still go to therapy. I'm still working through the effects of growing up the way I did. But I don't question my memories anymore. I don't wonder if I'm being dramatic or exaggerating. I know what happened to me was real, and I have an entire folder of documentation to prove it. That validation, as painful as the process was to get it, has been life-changing. Confronting parental myths is liberating, but nothing quite compares to the earthquake of a DNA test that rewrites your entire origin story. I took one of those DNA tests as a Christmas gift to myself. You know the kind. Spit in a tube, mail it off, wait 6 weeks to find out you're 12% Scandinavian or whatever. My mum's side is Italian, dad's side is Irish and German, so I figured I'd get some confirmation of that. Maybe connect with a few distant cousins who also wanted to waste $99 on saliva analysis. It seemed like harmless fun. The results came back in early February. The ancestry breakdown was pretty much what I expected. 43% Italian, 31% Irish, some German, a little bit of everything else. Cool. Then I clicked on the DNA relatives section, and that's where everything fell apart. There was a match labeled close family, not fourth cousin twice removed. Close family. The system estimated we shared 25% of our DNA, which according to the little info box meant we were likely half-siblings, grandparent and grandchild, or aunt and niece. I stared at that for a solid 5 minutes trying to make it make sense. I'm an only child. Both my parents are only children. My grandparents are all dead. There shouldn't be anyone in the close family category except my parents. Her name was Jennifer. Her profile said she was 31, 2 years older than me. She'd listed her location as Portland, which meant nothing to me because I'd grown up in Ohio and none of my family had any connection to the Pacific Northwest. I sent her a message, something generic like, "Hi, the system says we're related, but I'm not sure how. Do you know anyone from Ohio?" She responded within an hour, said she didn't know anyone from Ohio, but her father's name was Robert Chen, and maybe that rang a bell. It didn't. I'd never heard that name in my life. I told her my parents were Tom and Marie, last name Sullivan. She went quiet for a bit. Then she asked if we could do a video call. We talked for 3 hours that first night. Jennifer had taken the DNA test looking for her mother's side of the family because she'd been raised by her dad after her mom left when she was little. She wasn't expecting to find a half-sister either, but the math was pretty clear. We shared 25% DNA. We were close in age. One of our parents had to be the same person, and it clearly wasn't our mother's. She showed me a picture of her dad, Robert Chen, 58 years old, worked as an architect, lived in Portland his whole life. I'd never seen him before, but when Jennifer pulled up photos of her other siblings, her full siblings, I saw it. I saw my face in theirs, the same nose, the same eyes, the same weird, crooked smile I'd always thought came from my mum's side. Jennifer said her dad had mentioned once that he'd had a relationship with a woman named Marie back in the early 90s, that it ended badly, that there'd been a child but the mother didn't want him involved. She'd never connected those dots until now because he'd never said my name, never showed pictures, and she'd assumed if I existed I knew about them. I felt like I was watching my life recontextualize in real time. My dad, Tom, the man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding, wasn't my biological father. My mother had been having an affair when I was conceived, and somehow everyone knew but me. And here's where it gets absurd. I called my mum that night, asked her point blank if she knew anyone named Robert Chen. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she asked where I heard that name. I told her about the DNA test, about Jennifer, about the fact that I apparently have 3 half-siblings in Portland and a biological father who's been alive and well this entire time. She tried to deny it at first, said the test must be wrong, that those things aren't accurate, that I shouldn't trust some internet company with my genetic information. I told her I'd already video called Jennifer, that I'd seen the pictures, that the resemblance was undeniable. She went quiet again. Then she said we'd talk about it Sunday at dinner like we did every week, like this was something that could wait, like I hadn't just found out my entire origin story was a lie. Sunday dinner was 4 days away. I spent those days going down every possible rabbit hole. I talked to Jennifer every night. She connected me with Robert, my biological father, who'd apparently known about me my whole life, but respected my mother's wishes to stay uninvolved. He'd sent child support through a lawyer for years. He had pictures of me from a distance at school events. He'd been watching my life happen from the sidelines because my mother told him that was the deal. I met my other half siblings through video calls. Melissa, 34, a teacher. James, 28, worked in tech. They'd known about me in abstract terms, but never expected to actually meet me. They were cautious at first, not sure if I'd be angry or want anything from them, but we clicked pretty quickly. They told me stories about Robert, about growing up with him, about family traditions and inside jokes and whole histories I'd been excluded from. Tom, the man I'd called Dad my whole life, called me twice during those 4 days. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say to him. Was he a victim in this too, or had he been complicit in the lie? Sunday dinner came. I showed up at my parents' house with printouts, DNA results, screenshots of conversations with Jennifer, pictures of Robert and my half-siblings. I put them all on the dining room table before Mom even finished setting out the plates. I asked her to explain, to tell me the truth, all of it. She sat down and folded her hands like she was about to deliver a business presentation. Said yes, she'd had an affair with Robert in '92. Said yes, I was his biological child. Said Tom knew from the beginning because she'd told him while she was pregnant. Tom had agreed to raise me as his own on the condition that Robert stayed away. Robert had agreed to the terms because he didn't want to break up a marriage. Everyone made their choices and moved on. I asked why she never told me. She said it would have complicated things. That I had a father who loved me and a stable home, and telling me would have just confused me and served no purpose. She said it like it was obvious, like denying me an entire half of my genetic family and medical history and identity was just practical decision-making. Tom was crying. Actually crying at the dinner table. He said he'd wanted to tell me so many times over the years, that he'd almost told me when I turned 18, when I got married, when I had my own kids, but Mom had always talked him out of it. Said it wasn't the right time, said it would hurt me more than help. He'd gone along with it because he loved her and he loved me, and he didn't want to blow up the family. But that wasn't even the worst part. I asked my mother if she felt bad at all, if she regretted lying to me for 29 years. She looked me in the eye and said no. She said she'd made the best decision she could with the information she had at the time. She said I'd had a good childhood, a good life, and that was what mattered. She said DNA didn't make someone a parent, and Tom had been more of a father to me than Robert ever could have been. And technically, she wasn't wrong about that last part. Tom had raised me. He'd been there for every milestone. But that didn't make the lie okay. That didn't make it acceptable to deny me the truth about my own existence. That didn't give her the right to decide who I got to know and who I didn't. I left. Didn't finish dinner, didn't hug anyone goodbye, just took my printouts and walked out. Tom called me later that night, apologizing, saying he should have been stronger, should have told me himself years ago. I told him I needed time. I still don't know how I feel about him. He lied to me, but he also loved me. He raised me knowing I wasn't biologically his and never once made me feel less than. But he also went along with keeping me in the dark for 3 decades. I've been building a relationship with Robert and my half-siblings over the past 8 months. It's strange and awkward and sometimes painful because we're trying to compress a lifetime of family bonding into video calls and weekend visits, but they're good people. Robert is kind and thoughtful and clearly regrets not fighting harder to be in my life. My half-siblings have welcomed me without hesitation. I have nieces and nephews I'd never met. I have a whole extended family that actually wants to know me. Mum and I barely speak now. She thinks I'm overreacting. Says I'm throwing away the family that raised me for strangers who share some DNA. She doesn't get it. Or maybe she does and just doesn't care. Tom and I talk occasionally. It's strained. I'm trying to separate my anger at the lie from my love for the man who raised me. But it's hard. Every childhood memory feels tainted now. Every time he called me his daughter, Was there an asterisk in his mind? I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive them. I don't know if the relationship with my biological father's family will feel less awkward with time. I don't know how to reconcile the life I thought I had with the reality of what it actually was. But I do know that I deserve the truth, and I know that no amount of good intentions justifies stealing someone's identity from them. DNA surprises are shocking, but at least they're accidental discoveries, unlike the very intentional theft some family members plan for years. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. She was 92, lived a full life, and left behind a modest estate that she wanted split equally among her 5 grandchildren, me, my 2 siblings, and my 2 cousins. The will was clear. Everything divided 5 ways. Simple, fair, exactly what she wanted. My cousin Brian volunteered to be executor. He was the oldest grandkid, had some business experience, and said it would simplify things if one person handled all the paperwork. Nobody objected. We were all grieving. Nobody wanted to deal with legal stuff, and Brian seemed organized and trustworthy. He'd always been the responsible one, the one who had his life together. We figured the estate would be settled in a few months and we'd all get our share. 2 years later, we hadn't seen a single dollar. Every time one of us asked Brian about the estate, he had an excuse. Legal complications, estate taxes that were more than expected, property valuations taking forever, creditors that needed to be paid first. He'd send these long emails full of legal jargon explaining why things were delayed. He'd forward documents that looked official but didn't really explain anything. He'd say he was working with lawyers and accountants and that these things just take time. At first, I believed him. I don't know anything about probate law. For all I knew, estates did take years to settle. My siblings seemed to accept his explanations too, but something felt off. Grandma didn't have debts. She owned her house outright. She had savings and some investments. It wasn't complicated. There was no reason it should take this long. I started asking more specific questions. How much were the estate taxes exactly? Who were these creditors? Could I see itemized expenses? Brian got defensive, said I was questioning his integrity, said if I didn't trust him, maybe I should hire my own lawyer. So I did. I found a probate attorney named Sarah who specialized in estate disputes. I gave her everything I had. Grandma's will, the emails from Brian, the vague documents he'd sent. She looked through it all and then asked me a question that made my stomach drop. She asked if I'd received any accounting of the estate assets, any official inventory of what Grandma left behind. I said no. Brian had never provided one. Sarah said that was a massive red flag. Executors are legally required to provide a full accounting to beneficiaries. The fact that Brian hadn't done that in 2 years suggested he was hiding something. She filed a petition with the probate court demanding a full accounting of the estate and all transactions Brian had made as executor. Brian lost his mind when he got served, called me screaming about how I was tearing the family apart over money, how I was disrespecting Grandma's memory, how I was too impatient to let him do his job, but he didn't provide the accounting. Instead, he hired his own lawyer who filed motions trying to block our petition, which just made Sarah more suspicious. The court ordered Brian to produce the accounting within 30 days. When he finally did, Sarah and I sat in her office going through page by page. That's when we found it. The estate had been worth approximately $800,000. Grandma's house, her savings, her investment accounts, some stocks. But according to Brian's accounting, only $200,000 was left. $600,000 gone in 2 years. Sarah started picking apart the transactions. Brian had paid himself executor fees of over $100,000. That alone was suspicious because executor fees are supposed to be reasonable, usually a small percentage of the estate. He'd also created all these supposed debts that Grandma owed, medical bills that seemed inflated, property repairs that were never done, loans from Brian himself that he claimed Grandma had taken out years ago with no documentation. And here's where it gets absurd. Sarah noticed that a lot of the money had been transferred to accounts in his wife's name, Kelsey. She'd apparently been hired as an estate consultant, whatever that means, and paid herself $70,000. There were transfers to LLCs that Brian and Kelsey controlled, real estate transactions where estate property was sold to companies they owned at below market value. It was a whole elaborate system designed to siphon money out of the estate while making it look legitimate on paper. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sarah found forged documents, loan agreements between Grandma and Brian that were supposedly signed 5 years ago, except the notary stamp was from a notary who didn't get licensed until 3 years ago. Receipts for estate expenses with dates that didn't match when the vendors said the work was done. Entire transactions that appeared to be completely fabricated. Brian had been running a scam, a systematic, planned theft of his own grandmother's estate, and he'd counted on the rest of us not knowing enough about probate law to catch him. Sarah filed an emergency petition to remove Brian as executor and freeze all accounts connected to the estate. She also filed a lawsuit against Brian and Kelsey for theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and a bunch of other legal terms I didn't fully understand but sounded serious. The court granted the emergency petition. Brian was out. A professional executor was appointed to take over. The new executor started unwinding everything Brian had done. During that process, during the discovery phase of the lawsuit, we found something that made my blood run cold. Evidence that Brian had done this before, to other elderly people, family friends of Grandma's who had made him executor or given him power of attorney. He'd been systematically stealing from vulnerable old people for years. There were emails between Brian and Kelsey discussing targets, planning how to gain the trust of elderly people with assets, talking about how to structure transactions to avoid suspicion. They had a whole playbook. Grandma wasn't the first. She probably wasn't even the only one happening at the same time. We turned everything over to the district attorney. They opened a criminal investigation. Brian and Kelsey were both charged with elder fraud, forgery, theft, and a list of other crimes. The trial happened last year. They were both convicted. Brian got 8 years in prison. Kelsey got 5. We recovered most of the money eventually. Not all of it. Some had been spent or hidden in ways we couldn't trace. But the new executor managed to get back about $650,000 of the original $800,000. It got split 5 ways like Grandma wanted. Each of us got our share, minus all the legal fees. But the family is destroyed, permanently. Brian's parents, my aunt and uncle, initially defended him, said we were overreacting, that it was a misunderstanding. Even when the evidence came out, they tried to minimize it. Said Brian made mistakes but didn't deserve prison. That family should stick together. They stopped talking to those of us who testified at the trial. My siblings and I don't go to family gatherings anymore. There aren't really family gatherings to go to anyway. Grandma was the glue that held everyone together, and Brian used her death as an opportunity to rob us all. The trust is gone, the relationships are gone. We have family group chats that are just me and my siblings now. Everyone else split off into camps. I think about what Grandma would say if she knew what happened. She loved Brian, trusted him, thought he'd take care of things, and he used that trust to steal from all of us, to steal from her memory. She worked her whole life to leave something for her grandchildren, and he treated it like his personal bank account. The money matters less to me now than the betrayal, than knowing someone in my own family was capable of something that calculated and cruel. Brian didn't just steal inheritance. He stole years of our lives dealing with legal battles. He stole our family unity. He stole the peace we should have had after losing Grandma. He's in prison now. I don't visit. I don't write. Neither do my siblings. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have that cousin anymore. The person I thought I knew never really existed. He was always just someone looking for an angle, waiting for an opportunity. And when Grandma died, he found it. Family fraud is personal, but workplace sabotage adds a professional nightmare to the betrayal, especially when someone plants evidence to destroy your career. My co-worker Amanda and I had always been friendly. Not friends exactly, but we got along fine. We'd chat by the coffee machine, compare notes on projects, occasionally grab lunch together when the rest of the team was busy. So when we both ended up in the running for the same senior analyst promotion, I didn't think it would be weird. I figured may the best candidate win, and either way, we'd still be professional about it. I was wrong about that. Very wrong. The first sign something was off came during a routine one-on-one with my manager, Robert. He seemed tense, kept asking me vague questions about my relationship with competitors, whether I'd been in contact with anyone from rival companies. I told him no, not beyond normal industry networking stuff. LinkedIn connections, maybe a conference conversation here and there. Nothing unusual. He nodded but didn't seem satisfied. I left that meeting with this weird pit in my stomach, like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. 2 days later, I was called into HR. Robert was there, so was Patricia from legal. They had printed emails spread out on the table in front of them. My emails, according to the address at the top, messages to people at competing firms with confidential attachments, product specs, client lists, pricing strategies, stuff that would absolutely be considered proprietary information, stuff I would never ever send to anyone outside the company. I stared at those printouts trying to make my brain process what I was seeing. They looked real. The email formatting was right. My signature was there, but I hadn't sent them. I told Robert and Patricia exactly that. I didn't send these. I don't know where they came from, but they didn't come from me. Patricia asked if someone else had access to my email. I said no, I had two-factor authentication enabled. Robert asked if I was sure I hadn't sent them, maybe forwarded something by accident. I said I was absolutely sure because I'd never even opened those files, let alone attached them to emails. They suspended me pending investigation, sent me home that same day, told me not to access any company systems, not to contact anyone on my team, not to discuss the situation with anyone. I walked out of that building in complete shock. I drove home and just sat in my car in the driveway, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Here's the thing about being accused of something you didn't do. It messes with your head. You start questioning yourself even when you know you're innocent. Did I somehow send something without realizing it? Did I get hacked? Is there any possible explanation for this that doesn't involve someone deliberately setting me up? I spent 3 days spiraling before I decided to fight back. I hired a lawyer, cost me $2,000 just for the initial retainer, money I really couldn't afford to spend, but I needed someone who knew employment law and could navigate this properly. My lawyer, Catherine, immediately requested full IT forensics on my email account and computer. She said if I was telling the truth, the technical evidence would prove it, and if someone had framed me, there would be digital fingerprints. The IT investigation took 2 weeks, 2 weeks of me sitting at home, not working, not getting paid, watching my savings account dwindle while I waited for someone to prove I wasn't a corporate spy. Catherine kept me updated. The forensics team was being thorough. They were looking at everything. Then came the report. The emails had been sent from my account. That part was true. But they'd been sent during hours I wasn't even in the building. One was sent at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I had my gym's check-in records showing I was at a spin class at that exact time. Another was sent during my lunch break, but the IP address was from inside the building, while security footage showed me at a restaurant 6 blocks away. The technical details didn't match my actual activity at all. And here's where it gets absurd. It found keylogger software installed on my computer. Software that recorded every keystroke, every password, every login. It had been installed 3 months earlier, right around the time the promotion was announced. Security went back through footage from that time period and found Amanda at my desk during lunch breaks. Multiple times. She'd sit down, do something on my computer for a few minutes, then leave. I'd always left my computer locked, but apparently she'd figured out my password using the keylogger she'd installed during an even earlier visit. She'd been planning this for months, accessing my email, learning my writing style, figuring out which files would be most damaging to leak. Then she'd created those fake emails, sent them during times I couldn't possibly have an alibi for, and waited for them to be discovered. She'd probably tipped off Robert herself, made some anonymous report about suspicious activity from my account. The level of premeditation was honestly impressive in a deeply disturbing way. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment sabotage. This was a carefully executed plan to destroy my career and reputation so she could get a promotion over a job that would have paid maybe $15,000 more per year. Catherine presented everything to HR with me sitting right there next to her. The forensics report, the security footage, the timeline showing I couldn't have sent those emails, the keylogger evidence. Patricia from legal went pale reading through it. Robert looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. They called Amanda into the office immediately. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but Catherine was, and she told me later that Amanda tried to deny it at first. Said the security footage must be wrong, that she'd never touched my computer. Then they showed her the keylogger installation logs with timestamps that matched her appearances at my desk. They showed her the IP address records proving the emails came from inside the building when I documented alibis placing me elsewhere. She apparently just shut down, stopped talking, stared at the table. She was fired on the spot, escorted out of the building by security with her personal items in a box. I watched from Catherine's car in the parking lot as they walked her out. She looked smaller somehow, defeated. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I just felt angry. She'd tried to ruin my life. She'd actually come close to succeeding. The company settled with me 3 days later. 6 months' salary, a written apology, and a promise to clear my record completely. They also gave me the promotion. Catherine said I could have pushed for more, sued for emotional distress and defamation. But honestly, I just wanted it over. I wanted to move on and rebuild my reputation and forget this whole nightmare happened. Amanda's effectively unhireable in our industry now. Word got around, people talk. Recruiters talk to each other. She tried applying to a few competitors, and from what I heard, they all passed once they made calls to verify her employment history. Turns out trying to frame a coworker for corporate espionage is the kind of thing that follows you. I still work at the same company. Got the promotion, got a team of my own now, got my career back on track. But I don't trust people the way I used to. I lock my computer every single time I step away, even just to grab water. I check my email logs regularly. I'm paranoid in ways I wasn't before, and I think about Amanda sometimes, about how desperate she must have been to do something so extreme, how twisted your priorities have to be to think destroying someone else is an acceptable path to success. The thing that gets me is how close it came to working. If I hadn't pushed for the forensics investigation, if I'd just accepted the suspension and walked away, she would have gotten away with it. She would have gotten the promotion, and I would have been blacklisted from the industry with no way to prove my innocence. The margin between my career surviving and being destroyed was that thin. Being framed by a peer is traumatic, but imagine your own boss, the person who should mentor you, stealing credit for everything you've created. I spent 2 years watching my boss Richard take credit for my work. Not occasionally, not accidentally. Every single project I created, every strategy I developed, every innovation I brought to the table, Richard would present it to upper management as his own brilliant idea. And I'm not talking about him just mentioning it in passing. He'd take my detailed presentations, my research, my analysis, and present them verbatim without ever mentioning my name. The first time it happened, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a new client retention strategy, complete with data analysis, projected outcomes, and implementation steps. I sent it to Richard for review before our department meeting. He said it looked good, made a few minor notes, and I assumed we'd present it together. Instead, he presented it to the VP without me in the room. When I asked him about it later, he said he'd mentioned my contributions, but the VP was more interested in the big picture. I believed him because I was naive and new to corporate politics. By the 6th month, it wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a pattern. I'd create something. Richard would present it as his own, and I'd be left in the background while he got praised for being innovative and forward-thinking. I brought it up to him once, tried to be diplomatic about it, said I'd really appreciate being included in presentations about projects I'd developed. He looked at me like I was being ridiculous and said that as my manager, all my work was technically his work anyway. That's how hierarchy works. I should be grateful he was giving me opportunities to contribute to important initiatives. I was constantly passed over for promotions. Every 6 months I'd apply for senior positions that opened up. Every 6 months I'd be told I wasn't quite ready yet, that I needed to show more leadership, more strategic thinking. Meanwhile, Richard kept climbing the ladder on the back of my work. He went from department manager to senior director in 18 months. 18 months of presenting my strategies, my innovations, my solutions as his own brilliant contributions to the company. The breaking point came when I overheard him in the break room talking to another manager. He was complaining about how much hand-holding his team needed, how he had to do all the real thinking because his staff couldn't come up with innovative solutions on their own. The other manager asked about the client retention program that had been so successful. Richard laughed and said, yeah, that was all him. Spent weeks developing that strategy. His team just handled the basic implementation. I stood there holding my coffee, listening to him take credit not just for my work, but also dismiss me as incompetent, and something just clicked. I was done being diplomatic, done hoping someone would eventually notice, done waiting for Richard to suddenly develop a conscience. I started documenting everything. I saved every draft of every project with timestamps. I kept detailed email trails showing my work product before Richard ever saw it. I started recording meetings, which was legal in my state because we only required one-party consent, and I was obviously a party to my own meetings. Every time Richard took my work and presented it without attribution, I had evidence. For 6 months, I built an airtight case, timestamps showing I'd created documents weeks before Richard presented them, emails where I'd sent him complete strategies that he'd later present as his own ideas, recordings of meetings where he'd claimed to have developed concepts that I'd literally handed him in written form days earlier. I had everything organized chronologically, cross-referenced, documented beyond any possible doubt. Then the CEO announced a major company-wide presentation. The topic was Richard's revolutionary 5-year strategic growth plan that was going to transform how we approach market expansion. I knew that plan. I'd spent 4 months developing it. Every data point, every projection, every strategic initiative was mine. Richard had asked me to put together some ideas for long-term growth, and I'd created this comprehensive roadmap. He'd barely asked any questions about it, just said it looked good, and he'd review it with leadership. Now he was presenting it to the entire company as his revolutionary vision. I didn't hesitate. I contacted the CEO's executive assistant directly, said I had critical information about the upcoming presentation and needed 15 minutes of the CEO's time before the event. I was professional, calm, didn't make accusations, just said it was time-sensitive and important. Maybe the EA heard something in my voice, or maybe she was just efficient, but she got me on the CEO's calendar for 7:30, the morning of the presentation. I walked into that meeting with 2 years of documentation. I didn't editorialize, I just showed him the evidence. Here's the 5-year strategy with my name on the original document, time-stamped 4 months ago. Here's the email where I sent it to Richard. Here's the recording of him asking me clarifying questions about specific elements. Here's the version he submitted to the executive team with his name as sole author. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Here's 2 years of the same pattern across dozens of projects. The CEO's face went from polite interest to confusion to anger as he flipped through the documentation. He asked me direct questions. Could I explain specific elements of the strategy? I could in detail, because I'd developed every part of it. Why hadn't I come forward sooner? Because I'd been told this was how corporate hierarchy worked, that my contributions were part of my job, that I should be grateful for opportunities to work on important projects. Did I have more examples? I had a flash drive full of them. He thanked me for bringing this to his attention and asked me to be available after the presentation. I said I would be. Then I went to my desk and waited. The presentation started at 9. The whole company gathered in the auditorium. Richard was up on stage looking confident, wearing his best suit, ready to present his revolutionary vision. The CEO was sitting in the front row. Richard started his presentation, got about 10 slides in, really hitting his stride, talking about innovative approaches to market segmentation. That's when the CEO stood up and interrupted him, asked Richard to explain the methodology behind the customer lifetime value calculations on slide 12. Richard stumbled, said something vague about industry standards and analytical frameworks. The CEO pressed harder. What specific data sources informed these projections? How did he account for market volatility in the 5-year timeline? What were the key assumptions underlying the revenue forecasts? Richard couldn't answer any of it. He tried to deflect, said he could follow up with detailed breakdowns, that the presentation was meant to focus on high-level strategy. The CEO said he'd expect someone presenting a revolutionary 5-year plan to understand the fundamentals of their own strategy. Then he asked Richard to step aside and invited me to the stage. I don't think I've ever walked farther than from my seat to that stage. The entire company was watching. Richard's face had gone pale. I got to the microphone and the CEO asked me the same questions he'd asked Richard. I answered every single one, explained my methodology, my data sources, my assumptions, walked through the analytical framework I'd developed and why I'd chosen that approach. The CEO asked follow-up questions. I answered those too. Then the CEO addressed the room, said there had been a significant misattribution of work, that the strategy they were about to hear was developed by me, not Richard, and that this was part of a larger pattern that would be addressed immediately. He asked me to present my actual strategy. So I did. I presented for 45 minutes about a plan I'd developed over 4 months, a plan I knew inside and out because it was mine. Richard was fired before lunch, escorted out of the building by HR, his access revoked, his office packed up by security. The CEO called me into his office that afternoon and offered me Richard's position, senior director, immediate promotion, significant raise. He apologized for the company failing to recognize my contributions and said he'd be conducting a full review of project attribution across all departments. I accepted the position, started the next week, inherited Richard's team, his office, his responsibilities. The first thing I did was implement a new policy requiring clear attribution of work, product, and collaborative contribution. Everyone who developed a project got credit for it in presentations, in documentation, in performance reviews. Radical concept, apparently. I ran into Richard about 6 months later at an industry conference. He tried to avoid me, but we ended up in the same session. He looked diminished somehow, smaller. I heard he'd taken a position at a much smaller firm, significant step down from where he'd been. He didn't approach me, and I didn't approach him. What would we even say? I don't feel guilty about what happened. I documented the truth and presented it to someone who had the power to act on it. Richard destroyed his own career by systematically stealing credit for work he didn't do. I just made sure the right person knew about it. He could have succeeded on his own merit. He could have developed his own strategies, his own innovations. Instead, he chose to build his career on someone else's work and then got surprised when that foundation collapsed. The company is different now. People get credited for their contributions. Junior staff get promoted based on actual work, not on whether their manager decides to share credit. It's not perfect, but it's better. And I'm not naive anymore about corporate politics or trusting that good work will speak for itself. Documentation speaks louder. Evidence speaks louder. And sometimes you have to be willing to bring both directly to the person who can actually do something about it. Bad bosses can be exposed, but sometimes the entire system is corrupt, and HR exists to protect the company, not you. I reported sexual harassment by a senior director to HR on a Tuesday morning in March. His name was Brian. He'd been with the company for 15 years, and he'd spent the last 6 months making my work life miserable. Comments about my body, touching my shoulders and lower back during meetings, explicit jokes that made my skin crawl. I tried handling it myself, tried being direct, tried avoiding him. Nothing worked, so I finally went to HR with documentation, emails, texts, dates and times, witness names, everything they could possibly need. The HR director, a woman named Patricia, took my statement. She nodded sympathetically. She promised a thorough investigation. She said the company took these matters very seriously, and I should expect updates within 2 weeks. I left that meeting feeling relieved, like I'd finally done something to protect myself, like the system was going to work. 2 weeks passed, nothing. I sent a follow-up email asking about the status of the investigation. Patricia responded with a vague message about these things taking time. A month passed. I sent another email. No response. I tried calling, got voicemail, left messages, never heard back. Meanwhile, Brian was still there, still my supervisor, still making comments, and now he seemed emboldened, like he knew nothing was going to happen to him. 3 months after my initial complaint, the harassment got worse. Brian started making comments about how I was too sensitive and couldn't take a joke. He began documenting minor performance issues that had never been problems before. I realized what was happening. He was building a case to fire me, and HR was letting him do it. I followed up in writing every single week, documented every non-response, every ignored email, every unreturned call. I kept meticulous records because something in my gut told me I was going to need them. By month 5, I'd sent 17 requests for updates. I'd received 3 responses, all saying the investigation was ongoing. That's when I hired an employment attorney. Her name was Rebecca, and she specialized in workplace harassment cases. I showed her everything, all my documentation, all the ignored emails, all the evidence of Brian's behavior. She looked at the timeline and said something I'll never forget. She said this wasn't an investigation, this was a cover-up. Rebecca filed a complaint with the EEOC and notified the company we were pursuing legal action. Suddenly, HR was very responsive. Patricia called me directly, asking me to come in for a meeting. I went with Rebecca. Patricia tried to explain that there had been miscommunication, that my complaint had gotten lost in the shuffle, that they were taking it seriously now. Rebecca asked for all documentation related to my case. Patricia hesitated. Rebecca said we'd get it through discovery if necessary. We went to discovery. What we found made my original complaint look like nothing. My complaint hadn't gotten lost in the shuffle. It had been buried immediately. There were internal emails between Patricia and Brian dated the same day I'd filed my complaint. Patricia had told him about it, had given him my statement, had asked him his version of events, and then closed the case based solely on his denial. She'd never interviewed a single witness, never looked at any of my evidence, just took the word of her friend, because it turned out Patricia and Brian had worked together for over a decade. But that wasn't even the worst part. As we dug deeper into the company's HR files, we found a pattern. 47 other complaints over 8 years. Sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, hostile work environment, all involving executives or senior management. And all of them had been systematically buried. Some were marked as resolved with no documentation of any investigation. Some were marked as unsubstantiated after cursory interviews that clearly favored the accused. Some just disappeared from the system entirely with no notes at all. Patricia and her team had been running a protection racket for years. They weren't there to protect employees. They were there to protect the company from liability by silencing victims and covering for perpetrators. Women had lost their jobs, people had been forced out, careers had been destroyed, all because HR decided that protecting executives was more important than protecting workers. I sat in Rebecca's office reading through case after case of people who'd tried to do exactly what I'd done, who'd followed the proper channels, who'd trusted the system, and the system had failed every single one of them. Some of the complaints were 5, 6, 7 years old. These people had moved on, probably thinking nothing would ever change, that they'd just have to accept what happened to them. Rebecca asked if I wanted to settle quietly. The company was already offering a significant amount to make this go away, but I couldn't do it. Not with 47 other people's stories sitting in that file. Not knowing that Brian and people like him were still there, still harassing people, still getting protected by HR. I told Rebecca I wanted to go public. She contacted a journalist she knew, someone who'd covered corporate misconduct before. His name was David, and he worked for a major national publication. Rebecca gave him access to the discovery documents, with names redacted. David spent 3 weeks verifying everything, reaching out to former employees, building the story. The article dropped on a Thursday morning, front page of their website. Major tech company systematically covered up sexual harassment complaints for years. They had quotes from 8 former employees who'd come forward. They had internal emails showing the cover-ups. They had documentation of the 47 buried complaints. They named Brian. They named Patricia. They named the CEO who'd apparently known about at least some of this and done nothing. The reaction was immediate and massive. The story went viral. Within hours, it was trending on social media. News outlets were picking it up. Employees, current and former, started sharing their own stories online. The company's stock dropped. Customers started boycotting. Advertisers pulled out. The hashtag that formed around it was everywhere. The company tried to do damage control. Issued a statement about taking allegations seriously and launching an independent investigation. Nobody believed them. The evidence was public. The pattern was undeniable. You can't spin your way out of 8 years of documented corruption. Federal investigators got involved. The EEOC launched a formal investigation into the company's practices. Other victims started filing lawsuits. The legal department was overwhelmed. Within 2 weeks, the entire HR department had been fired. Patricia, her deputy, 3 HR managers, all gone. They tried to frame it as the company taking decisive action, but everyone knew it was damage control. A month later, the CEO resigned. The board issued a statement about new leadership and cultural change, but the damage was done. The company's reputation was destroyed. Clients were leaving. Talented employees were quitting. The stock continued to drop. My lawsuit settled 6 months later for 7 figures. I can't disclose the exact amount due to the settlement agreement, but it was enough to never have to worry about money again. More importantly, the settlement included provisions requiring the company to implement new harassment reporting procedures, mandatory training, and independent oversight of HR. They had to actually change, not just promise to change. But here's the thing about going public like that. The money was never really the point. What mattered was that 47 other people's stories finally got heard. What mattered was that Patricia and Brian and everyone who'd enabled them faced consequences. What mattered was that other victims at other companies saw what happened and maybe felt empowered to speak up too. I get emails sometimes from people who read the article, people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking me for standing up. It's overwhelming sometimes. I never intended to become a voice for this issue. I just wanted Brian to stop harassing me. But once I saw the scope of what HR had been doing, I couldn't walk away. I consult now on corporate ethics and harassment prevention. Companies hire me to review their HR procedures, train their staff, help them build systems that actually protect employees instead of executives. It's ironic, I guess. The company that tried to silence me essentially funded my new career, exposing exactly the kind of corruption they engaged in. I think about those 47 other complaints a lot. Wonder where those people are now. Wonder if they saw the article. Wonder if it gave them any sense of justice or closure. Some of them reached out during the lawsuits. We formed a kind of informal support group, shared our stories, validated each other's experiences. That community has been more healing than anything else. Brian was fired, obviously. Last I heard, he was working for a much smaller company in a non-management role. Patricia is facing her own legal issues, lawsuits from some of the victims whose complaints she buried. The CEO is done in the industry. No board will touch him now. The company still exists, but it's a shell of what it was. They lost their government contracts. Most of their top talent left. They're surviving, but barely. And every time they try to rebuild their reputation, someone mentions the scandal. It follows them, as it should. I'm in a better place now than I ever was at that company. I work for myself, I set my own hours, I help organizations build better systems, and I sleep well at night knowing that I didn't just accept what they tried to do to me. I fought back, I exposed them, and I made sure it meant something. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, documentation is your superpower. Truth always surfaces eventually, and you deserve people who choose you consistently. These stories prove that justice might be delayed, but it's rarely denied when you stand firm in your truth. Tomorrow brings 15 more tales of exposure, revenge, and people finally getting what they deserved. Until then, sleep well, knowing that somewhere tonight, a liar just got caught.